You didn't say I'm being detained. Just walks away. Walks away from gun. Why don't you just be white? Like, just be white and you won't get stopped. I don't understand how you would, with the argument he's set up so far, I don't know how he would not just take that position. Okay, it feels like Relly's kind of contradicting himself here. It feels like he can't quite decide whether he thinks this was a justified stop or not. He's better than Hassan in every possible way. Well, that's not true, is it? Hassan's way more attractive, way taller, way stronger, way more socially capable. He's got way more friends, he's got way more money. There's a bunch of other things I could just list off. I'm not going to go that crazy right now.
Yeah,
how are you guys celebrate Pride Month? Me and my friend Hassan are going to okay, so we are going to take a look at this Pisco are relevant debate. Okay, it's about Hassan getting detained. It's about whether he should. I think they argue not just about whether he got detained, which obviously we spoke about the other day. Well, Hassan might have lied about the timeline. It's unclear. I haven't looked into that fully. The fact is that both Hassan and the government agree that he was in some way detained. They say in the statement that it was a lawful inspection and that he was released. So that implies at some point, if you're released, you were not free to go. So, and obviously you can't deny a inspection at the airport. The idea of not being detained if you are at an airport getting inspected is like so insane. Anyway, by a government agent, obviously. So, Pisco spoke to Are Relevant. I think not only did they discuss whether he's detained, but also whether it was right and whether he should be locked up, what material support for terrorism means. Now, a lot of people say that Hassan should or could be locked up under the material support for terrorism laws that exist. However, the precedent for using that for speech is actually, so there are a couple of cases. I think one is there were terrorists being trained in peace negotiations, and that was not allowed because that's some kind of like logistic support. It's like verbal. So despite that being done through speech, that is still considered material support because it's training. And the other one was, I believe, like legal counsel or something. Was material support, which obviously has legal counsel has a value. Now, whether that extends to just saying, well, it doesn't really. There's no reasonable interpretation that I think extends to just saying, Houthis are awesome, which is what Hassan said or whatever. 10 toes down, I support blah 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 blockade, whatever. I don't want to say the full thing because I do worry about, I'm not Hassan, so I might get banned for saying crazy stuff, even if I'm just quoting. But, yeah, so I don't think there's any real precedent to suggest that that counts as material support. And you're kind of an insane loser if you're okay with your freedom of speech being clamped down on just to f over some himbo on the internet that you find annoying. Not gonna lie. You're kind of like an insane loser with no principles. So we're gonna see Pisco debate Relly about this and see what they say. I think Pisco's obviously defending Hassan in this case. Pisco actually gives a f about his country and the institutions and principles that are supposed to have built it. Let's take a look.
Off camera.
I don't mind either or.
It's totally up to your preference.
Okay, I'd rather do it off camera because it's annoying to set up my camera on this.
No worries whatsoever. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. You know, just pretty much just doing this Hassan arc.
Yeah. So I'm depending on how long this lasts. I have a separate thing that it's very convenient that this also came up because I had a second thing that I really wanted to talk to you specifically about, which is the nationwide injunctions and like what your thoughts are on that. Because I don't know enough about the consequences of nationwide injunctions and the
mixed
pros and cons
guy
and
okay, dude.
all of that stuff, because there was a whole bunch of talk about that I thought was really interesting, but I have no idea how to digest it. But yeah.
Yeah, 100%. We can do both. Would you want to start with the injunctions or do you want to start with Hassanabi?
Let's start with Hassan and let's finish on the injunctions.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Hit me.
All right. So based on or actually, do you want to tell me what your opinion is on Hassan's detainment?
Yeah. So I basically think the following. I think that Hassan was detained. I have to say this because a lot of people seem to disagree with some base facts or first principles. I think it's more likely than not Hassan was detained. I think that Hassan probably either lied, exaggerated, was wrong, or whatever you want to say. More likely than not, I would say deliberately exaggerated / lied about
Probably
the amount of
embellished.
time that his detainment took. I think that Hassan generally probably is upplaying, you know, the story in general.
Okay.
But I think it's more likely than not that either he was pulled over, that is to say detained, he was questioned, or the series of questions had to do with viewpoint discrimination. That is, but for his viewpoints on Trump and Israel-Palestine, he was either stopped, questioned, or
Who up playing
the
they
specific
shit.
line of questioning was initiated. And in other words, I think that some part of this encounter constituted viewpoint discrimination. And
Okay.
that's bad.
I was up playing like one time the other day and got
Okay.
blocked for it.
So let's first define detainment under that, because depending on how we define some of these things, we'll kind of structure the conversation. So as I've seen at least some of his speech about his detainment, it seems like it's questionable whether or not he could have left at any period of time. What is your... It seems like at one point in the retelling of the story, he says, like, am I detained? Like, can I just go? And then he seems to imply that the conversation just ended there, and then he could leave. So,
Yeah. So
go ahead.
I'll start by, you asked me, like, let's define detainment. I take detainment to be what's known as a constitutional seizure.
Schizomankic syndrome only
basically,
ever validated. Wait, 1 minute. I actually forgot something earlier. I got added to so I got this notification in regards to my Kirsch tweet. Mixie Pisa added you to their lists. Narcissistic sociopaths and the unthinking depths.
Is I take to be two kind of elements, which is, did the police put you under a reasonable apprehension that you were not free to go? Basically, just I can boil that down to one element for now. I've reserved the right to add another element, as I recall my con law. But basically, if the police or any kind of government official is putting you in a reasonable apprehension that you are not free to go, I would consider you to be detained. Yeah.
So when you say reasonable apprehension, to be clear, are you just saying like the average person would reasonably assume that you're not free to go? Or what do you mean?
Correct. So for example, if a cop pulls a gun on you and says, "Don't move," right?
Yeah.
A crazy person who doesn't understand guns, doesn't understand causality, would just be like, "Whatever. I'm free. I'm free.
I'm
as a
not being
bird," and
detained.
They don't really understand anything. Notwithstanding that, like, particular.
I'm not
person
being
has a kind
detained.
of
Walks
esoteric,
away.
or I should say, idiosyncratic
Based.
vision
W.
of guns and of
What is it
being
again?
under arrest and of what
I
they
can't remember what
do.
they're called.
A reasonable person in that situation.
What are
would
they? What are
feel
the
they're
guys?
not
I can't remember
free
what
to
they're
go.
called. Sovereign citizen. W sovereign citizen moment. That's it. Sovereign citizen. You didn't say I'm being detained. Just walks away. Walks away from gun.
Oh, they don't have the freedom of liberty to go where they want to go. Likewise,
I'm traveling.
If you're pulled over by a police, right? You'll say you're pulled over by a cop. A reasonable person in that situation, when there's lights behind you, and a cop is pulling up to your door, is not under a reasonable does not believe that they are free to go in that moment, that they have the freedom of movement. There could be some edge cases, but I believe that a person in Hassan's position, being stopped at the border, specifically for questioning, for what's known.
Yeah.
What the government-
If CBP agents stop you at the border and tell you they need to ask you questions, you're probably not free to go. I think that is a reasonable conclusion to come to.
admits is an inspection. Would not feel that they are free to go, and so therefore he was detained and under arrest. Now, because Hassan later on is supposing, or he's like saying, I guess I could have try to stop the cops from detaining me if I just like brought up some things. That's him speculating, number one. And it doesn't really matter because in the moment when he was being questioned, he had been put into reasonable apprehension that he was not free to go. And as point of fact, later on, the government admitted that they did inspect him and then quote unquote released him. And so under my definition, I think it fits. Under what the government is purporting to say, I think it matters. I don't think that Hassan's after encounter speculations matter for whether or not he was detained.
Well, what I'm referring to was a statement that he at least claims that he made to the person. And
oh yeah, so once he asked that question and the cop says you are, or the ICE officer or DHS officer, sorry, CBP officer says he's free to go, at that point I think he's no longer detained.
Okay.
But he's detained before
so it is from your position that he was detained the entire time, and when he asked if he could go, because I think what he said was like he asked if he could go, and then there was a little bit of like back and forth, and
yeah,
he ultimately just like left. I don't think he directly said you're free to go, but like there was some back and forth, and then he left, and there was some speculation as to whether or not he was properly detained, I guess.
Yes. So when the government is being a little bit weird about it, or whether or not he says it directly, and then they later like have some either body language or signaling or whatever implicit thing that signals to him that he can go, at that point, I don't think he's detained anymore. But I think any reasonable person in Hassan's shoes in the prior situation would believe that they don't have the freedom and liberty to go. And the mere fact that afterwards the government's being a little cagey about whether the detainment was proper, whether or not he was ever under a detainment or an arrest, that for me doesn't matter. What matters is, what did the police do?
No, I don't think you can know the exact nature of the detainment, but the fact that the government say it was a lawful inspection, they say it was, he was released, and I mean he was taken aside for questioning, and that seems to be like, he didn't feel free to go at first. I think you can reasonably interpret that he was detained. I think that's the base fact that he was detained by the way we usually use detained in a broad sense, is true. I think fundamentally that's, if there are people denying that fact, and that seems to just be true. Now, obviously, the exact nature of detention you can't really know. However, Pisco's point, from when I've seen him talk about this before, is basically that why would you, in the current situation, if they agree he was detained, why would you immediately jump to saying, Hassan, you're lying, you're embellishing, instead of either waiting or sort of being like pressing the Trump administration for info? Because it does, given we've got a trend right now of these sorts of stops, of these sorts of denials, of deportations happening because of beliefs about foreign policy or Trump or whatever. I don't know why you would give that charity to the Trump admin of, oh no, I'm sure it was fine. I'm sure it was lawful and not discriminated based on viewpoint or anything. I'm sure it was totally normal. I don't know why you would assume that about the Trump admin, because Destiny is irrational when it comes to Hassan. Sure, yeah, but we're trying to, this is talking to, I'm not talking to Destiny right now. I'm talking to the masses, okay? Talking to the masses who might otherwise be hoodwinked by some delusional felching sociopath.
And whether a reasonable person would feel as though that they were free to go in that moment. And I guess I'll ask the question to you, Relly. Do you think that if the customs officer pulls you aside and says, hey, we can bring you to another room and ask you some questions, would you feel that a reasonable person thinks that they're free to go?
No, I don't think a reasonable person would believe they're free to go, no.
So I therefore think that he was detained.
Okay, so...
No, it's nothing to do with Green. You are showing that you are the retard. He wasn't arrested. He was just stopped, questioned, and searched. It's because the retard in this video keeps using the same two words interchangeably. You are showing that you are retarded because you think detain and arrest mean the exact same thing. Police arrest you. You can have a citizen's arrest, but there are other agencies that can detain you without necessarily arresting you. Right? You can be arrested and taken to jail. That's being, like, arrested. Detained. You are held by some kind of agent, usually government. You're being held. That's all detained means, is held. You can't leave. No, he's not using them interchangeably. They're just saying detained. They keep saying detained. They're only saying detained.
Personally, so as for the detainment, I'm not sure if, like, for me, when I'm looking at detainment, I would look more at like the kind of like history and stuff, or the context of how that is typically conducted, like a CBP interview. I have no idea personally how like it's typically conducted if you are technically detained, because I've never been out of the country. I've never been interviewed in such a manner, so I actually don't know if this would, like, you're free to leave at any time or not. I would assume.
What do you take to be detainment? So what do you mean by when you say I don't know if that would qualify as detainment or something like that? What do you think detainment
like
is?
For instance, if a cop were to say, "Hey, come here, I want to ask you some questions," I would assume I'm not detained, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
I would happen to
and
agree.
they're bringing me. I would say the only material difference here would be, or sorry, the substantial material difference here would be the past context of whether or not, I guess this is like a typical detain. I genuinely do not know. When CBP pulls you off to the side, I don't know if you're free to leave. Like, that's my main thing about like detainment is, if I just walk away,
you're free to leave and go back to whichever country you just came from.
Anything, right?
Well,
can they do anything if I just walk away?
That's like whether you're actually free to go. But let me give you an example. So you gave one of the cop. I think it's a good example of the kind of ambiguities that cops will rely on to try to get people to give away their rights. So imagine instead that in your situation, your hypothetical, the cop says, "Come over here and answer some questions," and commands it like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that you're free to go?
I would assume not. No, I would assume not. No.
But say the cop is just being sketchy and he would act, if the guy just went away, he would move on, right? So in actuality, right, the person, if he left, there would be no consequences. But he's trying to make that guy be like a little afraid, and so he does that. Notwithstanding the fact that if the guy could, that is to say, like the suspect or whatever, could actually walk away scot-free, I think that we would consider that detainment under like normal American constitutional jurisprudence, notwithstanding the fact that he could actually go if he wanted to and not face any consequence. I think it's pretty much, for me, an easy case at the airport, because at the airport people assume kind of that your rights mean less. Now, some of your rights, there are some exceptions and some shortcuts that people can go for some of your rights in the airport, and so people kind of just assume that they just follow the direction of the CBP customs officer. And so I take kind of any instruction, but hey, step aside, hey, stay right here, don't, or hey, we got to take you into questioning. I think most people would be under reasonable apprehension that they're not free to go. And I think that's what matters, right? Whether or not he could have actually stepped up and got out, for me, isn't the key test for whether or not you're detained. It's what the officers are doing that would put a reasonably apprehensible person aware of on notice about whether or not they're free to go or not. That's what I think is the key test.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree, but I think the that specific distinction would cause for more of a judgment as to whether or not there is a misuse of, or a deliberate attempt to obfuscate what the authority or the bounds of the authority of the officer is, right? That's what I would say is more of like kind of at the discretion there, less like kind of some idea of like like, is the detention, or is it proper to question somebody or not? It's more of whether or not the illusion of detention is properly
Thank you for the 499 chilling in the South. Thank you.
Is it?
I would actually define detention as that, as someone who's been put in reasonable apprehension that they're not free to go. That is what I would define as the detention itself. Now, you could say, so I would have an additional concept, which is like, I don't know, physical custody, where someone is in actual physical custody and is actually is exercising control over that individual, maybe. But I would define the detention as that reasonable apprehension that someone is not free to go. And so regardless of whether or not the cop in his subjective mindset.
Dude, why is this
if
taking
asked,
so long
would
to just get through it,
say, "Move along,
basically?
get out of here."
The definition
I would
of
still say that you're
detention.
not
I
saying
want to
that.
hear the argument about whether it's
Similar
okay or
to,
not.
let's say that the cop, like a totally irresponsible cop, is just has a gun, his hand on his gun, which is out of its holster, and says, "Hey, Riley, come over here," and he's actually has no intention whatsoever of keeping you in jail or arresting you. And actually, if you
How's it
said
going,
something to cop
CPCA?
and
I
walked
saw
away,
you
it
on
would be
Coron's
nothing,
stream
right?
yesterday.
And so in that situation, you are actually free to go, right? You're actually free to go. Would you think that you're being detained in that moment, and that you are?
Would I reasonably interpret what I'm?
Yes.
I would reasonably interpret that I was being detained if a cop said those things to me. But if I walked away and they did nothing, I would say that my assumption was incorrect. I wasn't detained. They just wanted to make it appear as though I was detained.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try not to be circular. I'm not gonna say do you reasonably fear that you're detained. What I'm gonna ask you is, do you think that person who is responding to that cop with a hand on the gun, do you think that person is detained?
Do I think they are detained?
Yeah.
I guess what I'm drawing is a separation between the legality of detainment, like the actual validity of detainment, versus the perception of detainment. And that's kind of the distinction that I guess I'm drawing here.
Dude, this is pretty.
The perception is that, of course, you're detained. Like no
rough to get
reasonable
through. Okay,
person,
I'm gonna speed this up a
is
little.
going to assume that they're not detained. But the validity of that detainment would be in question. But either way, I don't think this is super material to the discussion, because as I've seen you have this discussion before, you refer to pretty consistently like viewpoint discrimination based on what Hassan has said. So in your mind, because it sounds like in one of the conversations at least that there are some First Amendment speech, protected speech, that you can do that would warrant a like questioning from like some entity, right? Or from CBP in this instance, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So for example, if it's First Amendment protected speech to say, hey, I contracted a virus, the West Nile virus or something, right? That's protected speech. The government can't punish you for saying I contracted the West Nile virus. But if the government detains you for that, or if the government asks you questions about that, you are not being detained or questioned or subjected to questions on the basis of your viewpoint regarding whether or not it's a good.
So yeah, I think this is where a lot of Pisca's argument comes from. Is you're not supposed to engage in viewpoint discrimination. Like, so while you could say something that would be directly relevant to like an investigation, like saying, "Oh, I've got this insane disease," that might get you stopped. That's not because you have a viewpoint. That's because you express something about a fact about yourself that indicates you might need to be stopped.
Whether or not your opinion about whether you have or don't have a disease. What they're stopping you for is for not the purpose of viewpoint discrimination, but the purpose of ascertaining like the health consequences of your entry into the country. Likewise, if Hassan had said,
"Oh yeah,
like,
dude, is the Wes AIDS shit real? Does Wes really have AIDS?" I saw that clip
with a Houthi representative, and we exchanged some money.
That's crazy.
In Yemen, as opposed to him going to France or whatever. And you were being stopped to ask about that, right?
Okay,
sure. You're not being questioned because you're pro-Houthi or because, but because of the material support criminal. It's a criminal action to material support a terrorist organization, and that has been found under Holder versus Humanitarian Law Project to not raise First Amendment concerns. It's an exception to the First Amendment. And so if he did that, if there was some evidence that he were materially supporting a foreign terrorist organization, you question about that for the purpose of aiding a criminal investigation, I also think that would not be viewpoint discrimination. What I take to be viewpoint discrimination is you're subjecting him to either to detainment or to questioning because you favor some views over other views. And that, I think, is what's going on, at least in one of the areas of constitutional analysis. That is to say, he would not be stopped or questioned about material support, but for his protected First Amendment speech.
Okay, so let's take the Houthi example, or let's imagine a hypothetical. That's this is a separate hypothetical, but I'm curious if we had intelligence that showed that there was a known terrorist inside of an area speaking to individuals, and this individual was in an area with a lot of people, right? and Hassan was one of them. Would you say that if they didn't interview every single person, stop every single person who is, let's say there's 150 people, they didn't, and they're all coming through the airport at once, crazy hypothetical. They don't stop every single person, but they do stop Hassan on the basis of his favorability towards, let's say, it was a Houthi, right? Because of his First Amendment protected speech. Would you say that's illegitimate?
So if there is evidence, so this is the example that I'm taking, so I just want to make sure I understand it.
I'm out of the loop. Who is debating Hassan? No one's debating Hassan. It's Pisco versus Relevant talking about Hassan. Okay.
There is a person in an area, right?
Correct.
A Houthi person.
Correct.
And you don't have evidence that
How much do you do a Finster?
Right?
You are getting instantly timed out for 24 hours.
And the only thing, and you're stopping people along the border, and you only have Hassan's previous statements about the Houthis. Yes, I believe it would be viewpoint discrimination to stop Hassan only, or to target Hassan and say we're definitely going to stop this guy because previously he's voiced support for the Houthis. So yes, I do take. Now, if there's some additional indicia that there was a meeting that took place there, and that there was a U.S. citizen who had a meeting with that specific Houthi in that specific place, maybe you have a stronger case. But it would be as though like so I'll give you another example.
How much for you to do is
the same example, but now there's only everyone's coming back and there's only one Muslim, and you say let's stop that Muslim because he's more likely to have met with that Houthi. What would you say there?
Well, I would say that that's illegitimate, but that's because Muslim being Muslim doesn't have the correlation with whatever it is that you're trying to catch. In this case, it would be terrorist actions. But
Houthis are Shia Muslims, right? So, or general, they're more likely to be Shia Muslim. So suppose there's a Shia Muslim.
Yeah, but you can also make the argument that they're like brown. Most of them are brown, so.
Yeah, you could make that argument too.
Yeah, that argument, we would appeal to a reasonability.
But take it, right? So say for example, everyone is coming back as Christian, white Christian. They're all white Christians from Sweden, and there was there was a Houthi guy there, and then there's one Shia Muslim.
Wait, sorry, one second. What's this? I'm wicking out. This is like literally. Dude, it's so annoying. Me and DK made all of this guy's best jokes. Early Spicy Chatters made Wick, and he hates us for it. We totally made this. This guy's username was Death of Certainty. He had to be bullied by Spicy Chat into changing it to Wick. Because he was calling himself Wick, and then calling his channel and Twitter and everything Death of Certainty. But no, change your whole thing to change your branding to Wick. Everyone knows you as Wick. And then I have insane early Spice Chat meme about you. Well, DM it to me. And then there was all these edits we made of Wick as well when we were posting like wicking out and all this shit. And that was all a Chud Chat meme that was supposed to mock him. It was supposed to mock him, like talking about being a cuck, saying like, you know, well, my wife's getting blacked. I'm wicking out. And shit like that. But now he just uses it, and he's used it for a long time. I saw Andrew Wilson getting in fights over the jar stuff, yeah. Wick gets a body system and marketing advice, but I just get kicked out.
How much do we need to donate for you to do some jar openings?
That's not happening. Thank you for the $5. Thank you for the $5. We're not doing jar openings. Okay.
Who's is wearing traditional Islamic garb and is coming back. Does the government have a right to target that person and say, well, all these rest of these people are Swedish, Nordic white people, and this guy is the one Shia Muslim coming back from a place where there was a leader of the Houthis. Could you stop him?
No, because the connection between what you wear and your religion is not strong enough in comparison to your stated outspoken political opinion.
Right. So I think that if we're talking about religion, you would say no, even though there's a degree of correlation. People who support the Houthis, you agree they're much more likely to be Muslim.
I don't know. We're the online left right now. I don't know. There's a lot of white atheists right now.
Yeah,
that,
but
I do you wrong on that one. I understand the
coming back from France and under the circumstances. Let's say even you think
you're gonna be using that mechanized Soylent opener from that one Reddit post. I just don't know what the mechanized Soylent opener is, but.
The rest of other people, they're Swedish. The connection between Swedes and Houthis, that's got to be low propensity. And so,
yeah, no, I would argue that that's simply way too.
It's a Sports Direct coffee mug. I think I've literally got one.
I think what you have when you're talking about a guy who said, America deserved 9/11.
I ordered one recently,
that, like,
but I never actually. It's literally still like wrapped and everything. I ordered one because I was drinking like significant coffees, but now I just drink espressos. So it's like, what's even the point?
Houthis are doing in the Red Sea, or no, he said everything that the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea is morally justifiable. It's like, it's all right. He's gone on, like, he's had a known Houthi who said he was a soldier on his stream and glazed. Like all these different things. I think we're getting far closer to any reasonable person's understanding of this person might support a terrorist organization in comparison to just somebody who's Muslim.
Okay, so I just want to make sure before we move on, though, to understand what your thoughts are about this. You do believe it's more likely than not that Hassan's stated views on the Houthis or on America, you said like that America deserves 9/11, or all the craziest things he's saying about what's justified, what's not justified. You do think it's more likely than not that those specific views influenced either his stop, the fact that he was questioned, or the specific line of questioning, correct? You do think that?
I truly don't know, and my basis of ignorance is based on a lack of knowledge of how frequently people get pulled aside for stuff like this. I've heard a lot of people who are responding to this talk about how ridiculous this is because they get stopped all the time, get asked a bunch of weird questions all the time. This is incredibly common, and just like laughing at how common it is. So I've never been out of the country.
The Houthi went on Noah's stream and said he wasn't part of any group. Yeah, I know. He said that about fucking 50 times.
Never been.
But I mean, doesn't stop anyone from saying he's a terrorist. He's a terrorist. Proven terrorist. Okay.
Through customs. That's never happened to me once. So I've never like personally experienced it, nor have I like looked up anything like it. If I had to say whether or not it's possible, it's definitely possible in this politically charged time that somebody recognized him and then pulled him aside, but I truly couldn't speak to the likelihood. Even on his retelling of the story, which, I mean, I would argue there's reason to be skeptical of his retelling of the story. I'm not certain, but...
You know, I think that, like, people are stopped for stuff.
Yeah, has anyone just considered, like... Has anyone just considered, like, when you go through border control, when you go through, like, the border, why don't you just be white? Like, just be white and you won't get stopped.
But assuming, right, that he were asked, do you support Trump? If he were asked that, would you agree that there's viewpoint discrimination going on? Likely, more likely than not?
More likely than not, or I don't know. I would have to see the whole conversation and how it went down. The way that he's retelling the story, like in a hypothetical idea where he's talking about how he's like, oh yeah, I just want to see where this goes. I want to see how far this I can take this. Like where he's offering up information.
Did really not engage?
More likely
support Trump. People are stopped for stuff. People are asked annoying questions. But assuming, right, that he were asked, do you support Trump? If he were asked that, would you agree that there's viewpoint discrimination going on? Likely, more likely than not?
More likely than not, or I don't know. I would have to see the whole conversation and how it went down. The way that he's retelling the story, like in a hypothetical idea.
I think saying you'd have to see the whole conversation, I think that's fine. That's not engaging in the hypothetical. It's saying that the hypothetical doesn't provide enough information for you to make it. That's different to I did have breakfast. That's different to... It's not quite the same thing.
He's talking about how he's like, oh yeah, I just want to see where this goes. I want to see how far I can take this. Like where he's offering up information that makes it sound like he frankly fucking hates the government and fucking hates America, is what it sounds like. He's the types of information he's offering up. Like, yeah, I could see him asking a question about Trump.
Yeah, so
like
I
that
think
question maybe could elucidate or lead to maybe sympathies for like a Trump assassination attempt or something like that, like one of the assassinations attempts. I literally don't know. I don't know where that could lead, but
if you're premising those lines of questioning, right? So it's possible a line of questioning about whether you support Trump could lead to someplace criminally productive. It also could not, right? But like the idea is, do you think that he would be asked those questions if he were a Trump supporter, right? If he were a Trump supporter, would he be asked whether or not he supports the president?
I mean, probably not, because they would just assume that he does.
Right. So they're subjecting him to this line of questioning and additional burdens, in my opinion, because he takes a particular view. That is, he takes a particular view against Trump and against Israel. And my prior on that is informed both by the specific line of questioning, but also because this kinds of things are happening to people in the immigration context all over. So in the case of canceling student visas, they're literally looking up individuals using AI and search tools to find out who was responsible for an op-ed, right? In the Ozturk situation, they did.
Yeah, I think that's ridiculous. I think all of that is you know, obviously egregious, and I would agree with the strongest condemnations for that type of conduct. But I don't think that this meets merit. This just seems like what it genuinely, the way that it's been described to me and the way that I see it is, CBP pulled him aside. Whether they pulled him aside because of they recognized him or not, they pulled him aside. It's hard to tell. And then he was subjected to a line of questioning where he, it sounds like by his own admission, kind of smugly wanted to lead him down a dialogue tree where he seems to describe his latest hits, where he's like talking about essentially how much he doesn't like America and likes Houthis, had the Hezbollah, Hamas, and all these other things. He interviewed a Houthi, stuff like this, which is going to prompt more questioning. Seems like he just had political views. Yes, I agree.
Fuck's sake, dude. Sorry, I'm like fucking doing stuff. I'm like retarded. I know. I'm saying I don't know where this is heading. But it feels like if Pisco's trying to convince Relly on the idea that it was definitively viewpoint discrimination, that's going to be tough because there's only a few facts that are actually confirmed by both sides, and without the transcript of the conversation, there's always going to be edges where you can be like, oh, well, maybe they asked because of this. Like, it's going to be tough to actually bring him around to that position. I feel like the better argument is to, like, get a few key things and be like, if this was true, if this part was true, would you say... But then he kind of tried that. He kind of tried that with the Trump thing, but now we've gone down a whole argument about all the specifics that would have to be in place. Yeah. They get there later. Fuck, I just went back. Oh my god. Let me pull up my stream.
Do you think that he would be asked those questions if he were a Trump supporter?
Have a CB
Right here.
Hassan's speech, at least in some context. Now, you could say, but the reason I'm asking this is,
I think that's right.
Although I wasn't sure I was going to get that response from you, I wanted to at least have some agreement with you that it's likely that they knew about his views prior to the questioning, that they were asking him about his views, not in ignorance, but they were pulling on strands which they largely knew that he had certain opinions, and that those opinions were anti-Israel and anti-Trump. That I think is the most likely situation.
If I were to believe that he was pulled aside for questioning, I think none of it had to do with him being anti-Israel and anti-Trump. More of it had to do with the fact that this dude, unironically, on live in front of 200,000 people, said kidnapping civilians is not a problem, shamed a person for saying that kidnapping civilians isn't an issue, praised the Houthis, then said everything that they are doing in the Red Sea is morally justifiable, and you're a Zionist if you think otherwise.
Is
that
that
would be
He didn't even say that,
That's
did he? I don't think he said that you're a Zionist if you think otherwise.
is that speech protected if you said that?
We've already.
You have to run every Hassan statement to the fucking extreme.
Protected speech can warrant questioning.
Not so by itself, no, right? So in the situation that you gave me, which there is a Houthi person in some place, and the person that you're targeting to stop is someone just based on their prior support for the Houthis in the United States, their statements. I answered you no.
Okay, so then let me give you a separate example. Let's say we have a 15-year-old kid who's going to school, and he praises online a bunch of school shooters. He says, oh my God, these are such great people. He talks about how, you know, he hates so many of the people at his school that are there, and he's really annoyed at all of his bullies, and he's just constantly giving praise to these school shooters. All of it's First Amendment protected speech. Should the police or FBI investigate him?
Yeah, so if you are... if you're praising a bunch of school shooters, again, the bar to investigations is really, really low. And if you take a dispositional attitude in favor of school shooters, then I think in general, because we have such a high protection of schools in this country, it might be viewpoint discrimination to institute some additional burden on him, but it might be justified under strict scrutiny, what's known as the compelling purpose test, if you impose some kind of burden on him. But I think you can.
I think a lot of people just think the First Amendment means you don't go to prison for it. Honestly, Orange Banana.
Very little rationale. But
Okay,
if you're imposing some burden
do you think
on
it's
someone,
improper? Do you think it's improper if a cop sees that, let's say on social media, a cop his kid goes to the school, cop sees it on social media, sees the kid. Do you think it's improper for him to be like, hey,
to stop him?
The government can rape your speech in literally any other way. They just can't send you to jail for it. That's basically what people seem to think the First Amendment is, and they just like, but then they will take like firmer stands in other places, but that's their fundamental understanding that it'll roll back to when it needs to.
Yeah.
No. I don't think it's improper for him to ask questions for a a security rationale of the school, right?
Wait,
And there you're not. But I want to be clear about that.
Go ahead.
You would agree though, if and just you're raising concerns in the school context where First Amendment rights are much less. I want you to know that, right? So that there's a specific doctrine related to First Amendment schools that touches on kids.
Okay, we can throw out school. We can talk about a public place. It doesn't have to be a school, right?
Well, I just want to tell you, there's specific case law and doctrine on First Amendment as applied to schools where like kids have used Snapchat in a way that has disrupted school activities. And in general, governments are much more empowered to infringe or to take measures that to protect students or to.
Yeah, but isn't the same about airports as well? Isn't it like more so with airports? Aren't airports literally the place where you have like some of the least rights in America?
With respect to Fourth Amendment and like search and seizure, there's a exception for the Fourth Amendment, but you still have rights when it comes to.
I'm not saying you don't have rights, but you're arguing you have less rights
just
in the
to be
context of
clear,
speech in a school. In an airport, I'm pretty sure you have like the least.
Just saying less rights isn't enough. That would justify stopping the Shia Muslim, right? Wait, that would justify.
Yeah. What is less rights? There are specific rights that are curtailed within airports for the sake of security, yes, but just less rights. Like, what does that even mean?
Stopping the Shia Muslim.
No, not less rights as in no rights, but your protections are lesser in an airport because you're making the appeal
with respect to the Fourth Amendment.
Okay, yeah, well, you're making an appeal that the specific like school is like a specific zone. I feel like that does the hypothetical a disservice. I feel like the hypothetical is based on any reasonable grounds that any normal person would look at that and be like, this person might shoot this place up or plant an explosive, right? It doesn't have to be a school. It can be just a random sidewalk where there's like crowded people, a mall, anything like that. And I'm sure we could find a hypothetical that doesn't have special cutouts for these certain protections. In your mind,
yeah. So in general,
so if a cop sees that you're posting on social media stuff that would have any reasonable person be very worried about the general public, but it's all First Amendment protected speech, you would say that it's illegitimate for that cop to bring that person aside and be like, hey, what's up? What's going on?
Yeah. So you're talking about a specific situation in which there are a bunch of like statements by an individual that cause concern in the general public. And largely that concern has to do with like, for example, interpreting them as threats. That's number one.
Sure.
And true threats are not protected under the First Amendment. But you're trying to carve it out and say, suppose that they're concerning statements that don't trigger inquiries under true threats, that don't trigger inquiries under the various exceptions to the historical exceptions of the First Amendment. In that case, am I against a policy that burdens those views more than other views? The answer is yes. And yes, that's true. So for example,
you would agree that you would view that as viewpoint discrimination.
Yeah. So for example, in the context of a school shooter, I can see many ways in which that investigation would be proper and justified because you interpret those as true threats because of the lower amount of rights that people have in schools, the right of the schools to be secure. But if you funnel down that pathway and you eventually got to the situation where okay, he's not a true threat. He didn't mean that as a true threat. This is all protected speech. You couldn't burden this person additionally. I hope you agree with this, right? This person who worshiped the school shooters. You couldn't say, okay, this person who worshiped the school shooters after we've investigated that it's not a true threat or whatever. Now he's going to be subjected to additional security measures at airports. Could you?
Additional security measures at airports? No, because you investigated him to be not like a legitimate threat. He's just like really weird.
Okay, so now take the following situation, right? You support someone who supports Al Qaeda. You say, I think Al Qaeda is doing the right thing. I think America is a vicious empire, and yeah, I do think that terrorism is sometimes justified against imperialist forces. And you write a whole book about it, and you release that book, and then you leave the country, you're a U.S. citizen, and come back. Is the government justified in stopping this person? Targeting him on speech.
I think they could possibly be. For just asking questions. Yeah, I think if they're just asking questions.
Yeah, you have to just say that, yeah, you're fine with that person being detained. I don't understand how you would, with the argument that you set up so far, I don't know how you would not just take that position.
Okay, so I'll take it one step further and saying, okay, this person doesn't support Al Qaeda, but they do support the Palestinians, and they do refer to October 7th. Okay, but they do think that October 7th was justified. October 7th was justified because. So
what is Relly's bar here? Is it support for specific designated terrorist organizations, or like I don't really understand.
I kind of draw the line at like not like some esoteric idea of like resistance against this. It's if you say I have no issue with these terrorist groups enacting active like definitional acts of terrorism is actually justified. That's where I draw the line where it's like, yeah, you know what? If you're gonna say stuff like that, I think it's fine if at the airport they ask you a couple of questions.
So if someone says, I think October 7th was justified, the government is okay. It's okay for the government to target those such people.
I would hope that it would be more than just that one statement. I would need more than just that one statement. In this case specifically, because we have a specific case in front of us.
I will say though, Riley's probably a lot less brain broken than other people on this. It sounds like a lot of people would just at this point answer, yeah. If someone said that, yeah, of course they should be fucking locked up for that. I think that's legit how someone like Nick Dorio might answer at this point, to be honest.
With Hasan, he has built not only it seems like a large chunk of his career off of this, but he's like doubling and tripling down. We have a individual that I would say there is
that's anti-Semitism. You should be in jail for that. That's saying that about October 7th. You must be anti-Semitic and you should be in jail for that.
Say based on his conduct publicly, there is a fair idea that terrorists would target this guy for possible recruitment or figuring out ways for them to, like, in fact, I would wager almost certainly a terrorist group in the Middle East has attempted to make contact with Hasan. Almost certainly that is attempted to be happening. Almost certain. Almost guaranteed.
If there's any indicia, right? So like this is the same rationale of the communist scare. I'll let you know, right? So were American communists in this country in the 1950s and 60s, and further on, and there were a great deal of actions taken by this government to initiate investigations and saying, of course, there must have been contacted by someone from the Comintern or the international, communist groups, and on the basis of that, and communism was a real threat back in the day, right? Like they took over Czechoslovakia. The Iron Curtain was moved on the move, and so and there actually were, by the way, many noted instances of espionage where they stole the atomic secrets. They stole the.
So I'm just going to say that this is a massive departure because there's a lot of historic stuff that we did that was illegitimate in our investigations and stomping up people's rights in regards to their support for communism or suspected support for communism. I don't believe you getting asked questions in a manner that is literally identical to random people walking through the airport, and that this happens incredibly frequently. I don't think having that happen to you is stomping on your rights. I mean, there's literally a die roll chance that that's going to happen to you no matter what. Like, we're not talking about like cops pulling them over.
Political opinions? Wait, you agree this is asking about political opinions, right?
Say again?
You agree that he was asked about his political opinion?
Yeah, based on his retelling, he was asked about political opinion.
When I do not think it's common for U.S. citizens coming abroad to come back and be asked about their political opinions.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, Shamu Banger coming in. Drew Pavlo believes the Free Palestine movement is an anti-Semitic death cult.
The Free Palestine movement is a covert anti-Semitic death cult. I mean, is it covert? And let me clarify here. I'm not talking about ordinary Palestinians. I'm talking about the activists in the West. I mean, the activists in the West are so thoroughly anti-Jewish. They're so blatantly genocidal at this point. The Free Palestine movement is a covert.
Wow. Intelligent commentary here, clearly.
I mean, I feel like, what is it? Just typically like, where are you coming from? Stuff like that, right?
Yeah, that's not political, right? That's not political opinion.
That's not political.
Right?
I don't know what invoked the conversation about his political opinions, though, because he, in the retelling of the story, he seems giddy about the idea.
Yeah, another Shamu showing a great example of ABC and post like hell in action here. You know, this actually got quote tweeted already by Drew Pavlo. He actually got the Drew Pavlo quote tweet. Yep, as I clarified, the activists in the West are basically a full death cult. You used to be pro-Palestine. You were for years. You even put Palestine in the same sentence as Taiwan. Was the money worth selling your soul? You should have stayed true to your principles. There's nothing I can say to you worse than you say in the mirror. That's kind of cold. That's kind of cold.
He said that he was like ready to crack open how far that this line of dialogue could go.
We'll touch on that, and I do want to address that because I think people have misinterpreted that and taken the opposite, interpretation of what I think they should be taking on that. But I want to talk about the hypotheticals some more. When I bring up the communist example, it's not to say that they're, just this is the same exact thing on all fours or whatever. But it is to say that there is some basis to believe that if you publicly affiliate yourself or align yourself with communists, you probably are more likely to be approached by a communist, right? Yep. From the International Comintern. Sure. If you publicly align with Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis, I don't disagree. You're probably more likely to be approached by the Houthis. Yep. But you agree, like, it wouldn't be enough to get a warrant off of, right?
Correct.
And so, so we agree, right? Like, there are certain deprivations on the basis of your state of belief that should not happen, right? So you agree, like...
The things that I'm saying is not a big deal is when you walk through the airport, them just saying, hey, what's up? Like, what's going on?
Right. So but I just want to be clear about the things that you do grant, right? The reason you would not want him to be stopped on the basis of his stated view is because maybe it's not enough evidence for probable cause or whatever to know that he is doing some criminal activity with his other organization. But I assume it's also because it would be viewpoint discrimination, right? If you're arresting people because, and I know you've already granted this, but I just want to make it for the audience. But if you're arresting people because they support the Houthis, you would agree that that's viewpoint discrimination, right?
Yeah, that's illegitimate. That can't be done. Yeah.
Now, if you had a policy that said, for example, we're going to any Republican that crosses, because you're more likely to be a MAGA extremist who did violence on January 6th. All Republicans must be subject. This is the line for Republicans. And if you're a Republican, you have to come in this line and answer an additional 2 questions about whether you support MAGA extremists, whether or not you support the Proud Boys. You would be against that too, right?
Yeah, because it's too broad.
Okay. What if there were a separate line that said, do you support the Houthis? Everyone who has ever vocalized support for the Houthis, you must get into this line. And in this line, you have to answer an additional 2 questions. That is, have you made contact with a Houthi? And are you planning to...
Dude, Pisco is such a debate rapist, man. What a great way of asking this. What a great way of asking it. What an absolute debate rapist. Would he be okay with a separate line for people who have expressed support for the Houthis, where they are asked additional questions? Everyone who's ever expressed support for the Houthis is followed into this line, and they have to answer additional questions
to attack the United States. And so if you've ever vocalized support for the Houthis, come in this line. Would you be okay with that?
No.
Why not? Isn't that
because
exactly
that's
what
not
you're alleging
sufficient.
has happened here?
You can support, and then you can fall off of support. You can do like whatever. I'm talking about this guy not only supporting the Houthis, supporting specific actual acts of terrorism, supporting several different terrorist groups, consistently like using his like platform specifically to talk about these issues. It's not incidental, because when you're talking about have you ever supported the Houthis, bro, there's like random people who work at the fucking subway who support the Houthis, right? Just like in a random Discord chat randomly. We're talking about like consistent, persistent support, not only for them but multiple different groups. And that guy just getting asked a couple of questions at the airport, I don't think we're stepping on his rights.
No, what you're hang on a second. So whether or not the deprivation is a big deal is a different question, right? So like it could be, right, that someone stops you for a minute because you supported the Houthis in the past, even if it's a minute or even if it's a couple questions. If the policy amounts to viewpoint discrimination, you'd say it's a big deal, right? Regardless.
Well,
so if you thought that this,
so I want to be specific. I have no issues with the actual like just the Merriam-Webster's definition of viewpoint discrimination, as per my hypothetical about the cop stopping a person who they believe, who they just saw on social media.
That's not very First Amendment.
Post of totally First Amendment protected speech of shit that makes them feel like they're about to do something crazy in a public area. I think a cop should look out for their community and be like, hey man, what's going on? You all right? Like, what's this? What are we doing here? What's this about? Do you need like help? What's going on? I have literally no issue with that. Genuinely, right now, in fact, actually, I would make a separate argument. I think the cop is right for doing that. I would hope cops do that if they actually believe that there might be a threat.
Hassan and Hassan affiliated streamers line
to the public safety like that. I would hope that they look at your protected speech and just say, hey,
that's the difference, right? So we're talking about here are 2 different things.
Okay.
So if the purpose of the cop is not viewpoint discrimination, it's to stop a threat, right? It's to stop an imminent threat. And on the basis of this person, he's in the public area and he's made those beliefs and he has no countervailing beliefs.
Oh, there is a typo in
that
that
this person
tweet.
is not a risk.
You're right.
If the purpose of the cop is to
let's redo that. Sorry, I typed that quickly.
Doing instead of investigating whether this person is an active threat right now.
What an idiot I am.
To the public order. And combined with the fact that he's supposing that he has the means to do so in that area, right?
Whoops.
And he's actively present in that area and it's consistently like co-aligning with things he said in the past before. Then I think that the purpose of him doing the questioning, although I don't know if a stop would be justified. Do you think a stop would be justified? That is, say, a detainment, or just being like, "Hey, can I ask you some questions?" That would be justified, but not like.
I think it would depend on the evidence, but in general, I don't think a detainment would be. I think it would just like a random questioning.
So the only reason a detainment would be the only reason a detainment would be proper here is because there's this exception at the border that you can like detain people, right? And you don't need to have probable cause or a warrant to detain people at the border. But if, notwithstanding that you don't need a probable cause or a warrant to detain people at the border, there can still be illegitimate stops at the border. And we've already gone through some, right? Racially motivated stops at the border.
But the reason why racially motivated stops is wrong is because of the level of separation. Let's say there was a single black person on Earth, one, and you got a report that was said that a black person was carrying a bomb into the airport, and you see a black person in the airport, I think it's fine to do a bit of racial discrimination then, because we're not picking up a needle in a haystack at that point.
Right. Yeah. No. So I agree with that. I agree with that.
So it has to do with the reasonability in connection. So, but just to be clear,
so
when
what
you
is
were
your
talking,
evidence? What is your evidence? What is your evidence that people who support the Houthis publicly are more likely to commit crimes, or to commit
more
crimes
likely to commit crimes? Well, my argument isn't that just simply anybody who supports the Houthis is more likely to commit crimes. My argument is to do, because as per the example, well, hold on, I want to get back to that, because what I'm going to respond to is you talked about the Houthi line or whatever, and I said no to that hypothetical anyway. But the you were talking about, well, the cop has is the purpose of the cop for that stop is to protect public safety. The CBP officer would be, in theory, stopping Hassan for the exact same reason, because he's worried about the public safety of like terrorist contact. Maybe he's trying to commit some kind of attack or something like that. I think that's totally illegitimate from my understanding. I don't think there's any reasonable grounds to believe that Hassan would commit to a terrorist attack, like in any real way. But that would, I believe, be the purpose.
So there are two things here. So one is, I think that that's not the purpose of the policy. I think the policy is to chill people who have those particular views and to chill people who support or don't support Israel. So I disagree. I think the policy is not a legitimate policy of trying to funnel out crimes and to stop crime. I think that this is in line with the policy they're doing with like the green card holder Ozturk, right? Why are they doing what they're doing with the green card holder Ozturk and with these individuals? Is it because they think that those people are likely to commit crimes? No, it's because they want to chill speech that's pro Palestine and anti-Israel. That's the purpose of why they're doing it. But even if I granted that this cop particularly, he actually had this legitimate fear and was actually security purpose, I would say that you would need to have more than just the stated view, right? In the context of the person stopping the individual in the public place, it's not just that he stated the view before that he supports these individuals, but it's that he's there, right? And he has the means in that moment to be an imminent threat, and he's present in that area.
You don't have a means for, wait, you don't know if that person has a means for an explosive? You don't know if Hassan has the means for an explosive either.
In that time period, there's some level of indicia. He's in a crowd, right? In that crowd, okay, you know, if it's a legitimate security rationale, yeah. What is Hassan likely to do a crime attendant to his presence with an airport, right?
From my personal knowledge, no. He's like, Hassan is not going to commit any crimes. No,
right? There's nothing about the airport and his presence in the airport that's linked to the kind of investigation that's undergoing by the people at the airport. The only reason they're using the airport to do it is because they know that they don't need to have a warrant or probable cause to stop people. But there's nothing specific about the airport which is triggering this investigation of Hassan, who has a fundamental right to enter the country, right? And so again, I want to stress there's kind of two components to what
That's a good point. That's a good point. So unless you think that something's going to happen, like at the airport or Hassan has brought something in, the only reason the airport is being used as a venue to question Hassan for his support of terrorism is because it's seen as a place where you have less rights. You don't need a warrant to stop someone and ask some questions and shit. And you can just... You can essentially railroad through that line of questioning. That's a good point. I think that's a really good point. Otherwise, you have to show that there's some specific reason related to the airport as to why he's been stopped.
What I'm talking about. Number one, the purpose. If the purpose is to chill speech, which I believe it is here because that's part of the and would you agree with that before I move on? Do you agree that this administration is trying to chill speech in favor or sorry, against Israel? They are trying to chill that speech across the board, right?
I don't know if that's their explicit purpose, but I guarantee that they like that outcome.
Okay.
I would.
Wait. Wow.
Okay.
Say an alternative
What's the
idea
purpose
for
in rejecting the green card?
Where have you been, buddy? You smoking crack? Where have you been?
And trying to deport Ramiza Ozturk and trying to deport Mahmoud Khalil, if not to chill speech in favor of Israel.
Well, I legitimately think, and I've met a lot of conservatives who think this way too. I think they might legitimately think that those people are terrorist sympathizers that do not belong in the country. They actually think that, and that they have the legal authority to remove them. I don't necessarily agree with the idea that they're like, no, we don't actually think that they're like,
okay, you're
like terrorist
crazy.
sympathizers. We're just trying to make sure
not many people
talk like this in
you're
that manner.
crazy. This is
I would say the chill speech is
way too much charity being given to Trump right now. It's the exact problem with all the fucking whipping up fears about anti-Semitism, man. People just are willing to give way too much charity to like obvious crackdowns on totally protected speech.
They are terrorist sympathizers, right? Or let's say that that's what they believe. And they're trying to discourage people from sympathizing terrorists, right? They're
Yeah,
trying to show
but
the administration.
to be clear, from that perspective, what they're trying, their main motive is to get terrorists out from their view.
Okay. So you don't think that they're actually trying to make people less inclined to do these kinds of protests?
No, I believe that they're probably intending to make them less inclined to do the protests. But
Yes, exactly.
I think the
So that's
main
chill speech,
purpose
right? That's chill
for
speech. Is that chill speech?
Yes, like I said, I don't disagree that they're chilling speech and
main
that they
purpose is
probably
chilling
like that
speech.
aspect of chilling speech. But for me, like specifically, when we're talking about like whether or not it's chilling speech, I don't see that as being the like necessary primary
Is
motive.
that at least one purpose? Is at
Yes,
least
yes,
one
that
purpose
is a
of
very
the administration?
significant. They believe that pro-Palestinian speech is pro-terrorist speech, and they are attempting to crack down on what they believe, therefore, is pro-terrorist speech. Yes.
Okay, cool. So that's one thing. So I think that there is at least a significant policy rationale for a lot of what the administration doing is for the specific purpose of chilling pro-Palestine speech and chilling anti-Israel speech. And that I believe is in their statements. That's what they're doing, and that's what they're going after is specifically people who've made those kinds of statements.
so-
and so I do believe that's one of the purposes. But so that's one
connect-
thing is the purpose.
So let's
Yeah, I'm
brief-
about to connect it to Hassan.
So yeah, let's connect this to Hassan because I don't
Yeah.
think I think this is wildly not the case for the Hassan situation.
So-
the reason
so for
why
Hassan-
is because I think it would be really, really phenomenal the idea that the CBP officer they don't believe that Hassan is an actual threat. Like in the hypothetical that he knows who Hassan is and he tries to get him aside for questioning, specifically because he knows who he is, specifically because of his view.
Yeah, I gotta say, we might talk about the Chagos Island stuff soon. People are retarded as fuck about this Chagos Island stuff, man. Thank you for the gifted membership, Noah. Huge appreciated. So actually, I should a quick chill. Guys, we've got 460 people watching right now, 70 likes on the stream. Some of those 390 people wouldn't mind please moving the cursor thumbs up and clicking it, or pressing a thumbs up on the mobile device. That'd be huge appreciated. Now, if you want to take your support one step further, you can donate directly through a Stream Elements link in the pinned chat message. You can also buy a membership to the channel, gift a membership to the channel, gift a whole bunch of memberships randomly throughout the chat. Buy a super chat, which will highlight a message and read it on TTS, or buy a super sticker, which is a YouTube image or GIF. Be highlighted in chat and I'll describe it to you. You can go to discord.gg/Queeman, twitter.com/Queeman, or reddit.com/r/Queeman. You can also now watch on twitch.tv/Queeman every day. And guys, we have a huge push right now for active participation, okay? Always be clipping ABC. There's a guide on the subreddit to always be clipping. Remember ABC. And post like hell. Okay, guys? I know you'll post peacefully, but post like hell. Okay, so always remember, clip streams when you see them. Clip important moments. Clip things you want to talk about. Run a Twitter account. Run a Reddit account. Have a Discord account. Post links everywhere. Post stuff on your profiles. Always be clipping. And post like hell. Okay, we need as much active engagement as possible. Okay, the people you hate, the thing they fear the most is you posting. Okay, you talking your shit. That's what they hate. Don't really care about the Chagos Islands. Most of us didn't know they existed before last week, though. So basically, the complaint is that we're paying a bunch of money because Mauritius declared independence in like the 60s or something, and we still have the Chagos Islands, and we basically said that we were taking the Chagos Islands when they declared independence. Now, the UN have, through a bunch of rulings, decided that we didn't have any fucking right to do that. So there's a bunch of legal cases going through right now that could potentially make it so that we can't even staff that base. Staff our military base that's there, the US-UK military base in the Indian Ocean. And it also could mean, if we don't make a deal with Mauritius to get sort of exclusivity in the region, they can sign deals with like China to have a Chinese military base there. So everything's coming to a head where we basically needed to have the legal cases with this base solved, like ASAP, so that we could make sure it remains in operation. There's not a chance for the Chinese to get a foothold there. And people are crying that we gave the islands away, that we're paying a bunch of money to Mauritius. But it's like we didn't really have another choice. Like it's either that or we completely fly in contravention of international law. And it's, well, you know, why would we do that? That's so fucking gay. It's just a bunch of retarded populists that are like, actually, fuck international law. Actually, fuck the UN. It's like, no, I don't want to be a dogshit country like America, frankly, or Israel. How about we, like, stick to the rules?
viewpoints. I feel like it would be so incredibly unlikely that that officer is pulling him aside so he doesn't talk about Israel-Palestine as much, so he feels less comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, Israel can get away with breaking international law. And guess what? We want a good moral position to be able to criticize them from, okay?
Not because he was worried that Hassan might be a legitimate threat. Like,
Okay, so
this
let's
random
connect it.
officer is like, I know that this guy is not a threat, but I want to make him be afraid of talking about Israel-Palestine, so I'm going to question him? That feels ungodly unlikely.
Let me connect it. So, but I just want to put out the framework there. So there's two things. One is the purpose. If the purpose is the chill speech, I take that to be discriminatory by definition and illegitimate. So if one of the purposes is the chill speech, that's enough. However, if there's some other purpose, such as a criminal investigation, such as security purpose, and all you're doing is you're proxying speech, and there's no other indicia of any threat or any criminal activity, I also take that to be problematic. That is to say, for example, let's say you legitimately want to stop.
Freddie, we went over the
and
Coast
you
Street
believe
earlier.
that the best way to do that is to like stop Muslims additionally or something, or is to stop Republicans, and you legitimately believe that, like you really think that Republicans are more of a threat by like 5x. Let's say you really think that Republicans, and you have the data that Republicans or black people are 5x the percentage likely to commit these crimes or to be the security threats. Notwithstanding the fact that you legitimately think.
Oh, you mean this one reply to my tweet that says, "You are such a colossal fucking F slur with 6 letters." Do you mean that reply?
Connected to the likelihood of propensity to do crime, I think even though the burden, the standard for starting an investigation or asking questions is very, very low, if all you have is that proxy to either protected speech,
I'm quickly learning that people's fans really don't like it when you call their favorite content creator a pig, or make tweets with oink noises in them, or say hog warning when you quote. I'm quickly learning this.
That kind of thing. Then I think we have problems, and then I think it's still problematic, even if you do have a security purpose.
So let's suppose a separate hypothetical then of the same example, because I don't really agree, but maybe you'll get me there on this separate hypothetical.
Okay.
Of the person who's making pretty reasonable threats to a public location, right? But they're not in the public location. The cops get a call as somebody who's worried about this person. The cops take a look at their social media feed or whatever and listen to some of the statements made. The statements are worrying, but they're just in their house. Do you think it's improper for the cops to go to that person's house and just ask them questions?
Yeah, so I think that it would be fine for the cop to go over there and because they're there and or to either to call this person, because the statements there could reasonably be construed as a threat and therefore not protected speech, right? Threats are not protected speech. But after having conducted that investigation, right, going to the house, asking him or calling him based on what could be interpreted as unprotected speech, all right, that is to say the reasonable threat to the public place, which absolutely could be interpreted as
no. What I'm articulating isn't like a reasonable, like, correct me if I'm wrong, a reasonable standard of a threat to a public place is actually a pretty high bar. Like, it's not just like I can say like, man, I wish a bunch of people went into downtown Chicago and just were like beating the shit out of each other. I wish that I could take a hammer and just beat the shit out of people in downtown Chicago. That's not like a reasonable threat.
And that's all you have, right?
Huh?
And that's all you have, right?
That's all I have.
Yeah, so I think maybe there's some sort of it's a low threshold, right? It's a low threshold. I in general think that the cops have no business inquiring with people about their protected speech, except to the extent that there's some connection to some legitimate purpose. For example, let's say the cop said something like this: "Don't say that." Right? We don't like it when you say that thing. Right? We think that's bad for you to say, and it's not an exercise of their speech. It's not maybe I could see a cop asking a favor, say, hey, would you mind not saying that to our town? And in which case I would take that to be an exercise of their speech. But in general, I would be against the police taking sort of official measures that impose burdens on that individual, if they're imposing burdens on that individual on the basis of protected speech.
Yeah, then I guess we would probably just. Good.
There could be some edge cases where, like, okay, placing a call to an individual outside of the context. This is not an interrogation. Remember, I am construing this as a detainment that is imposing a burden, and questions that do impose a burden. And so it's a very different context, I think, than like a simple checkup outside of the context of an interrogation, which is questioning under detainment.
Well, no, because a cop asking you a series of questions about troubling statements, I think would have any reasonable person under the assumption they're detained. So I think it would qualify under detainment as you defined it at the beginning.
No, I don't. No, I don't. So the detainment is when someone is in reasonable apprehension, in my opinion, that they are not free to go. And so
Yeah,
questions
so-
outside of the context of detainment. So if a cop comes into your house and says, "Hey, can I ask you some questions?" I don't believe that a reasonable person.
Wait,
would
what
do
did
that. I don't
what
believe
did
that.
Pisco say that I don't
I'm
believe?
talking about
Questions
so, as cop.
outside of the context.
I guess we would probably just. Good.
There could be some edge cases where, like, okay, placing a call to an individual outside of the context. This is not an interrogation. Remember, I am construing this as a detainment that is imposing a burden, and questions that do impose a burden. And so it's a very different context, I think, than like a simple checkup outside of the context of an interrogation, which is questioning under detainment.
Well, no, because a cop asking you a series of questions about troubling statements, I think would have any reasonable person under the assumption they're detained. So I think it would qualify under detainment as you defined it at the beginning.
No, I don't. No, I don't. So the detainment is when someone is in reasonable apprehension, in my opinion, that they are not free to go. And so questions outside of the context of detainment. So if a cop comes into your house and says, "Hey, can I ask you some questions?" I don't believe that a reasonable person would think that they're detained. I don't believe that. No.
So no. I'm talking about if a cop walks up to you and is like, "Hey, you've made some crazy posts on social media. Can I ask you some questions about, like, hey, I want to go to downtown Chicago and beat the shit out of people?"
I don't think most people think that I don't think most people think that they're detained.
You think if a cop walks up to a person, and asks you about a post that you made on Facebook about how you want to beat the shit out of people in a public place, you don't think most people would interpret that as like you're not free to just walk away from that and say, "No, I don't care, walk away"?
Absent some command from the officer, absent some drawing of a firearm, absent him saying, "Hey, step aside over here" as a command in a particular tone of voice.
Which could make funny, haha, face movements on cam. I'm about to eat, so I won't be eating on cam.
A totality of circumstances test, but I don't think the mere walking up to a person, asking them a question about a thing constitutes reasonable apprehension that you are not free to go. I don't believe that. No, I think the case law probably supports me on that, and I'll have to check into that. But all that is to say is, when someone is clearly detained and subjected to questions, I view that as a kind of different situation than someone who, a cop, going online, looking at some things, maybe giving that person a call, showing up to their house to ask them a few questions. I view that as a different in the sense of the burden, but also just additionally, just to be a trillion, quadruple % clear, in the case of the individual who made those kind of problematic but protected statements about that someone could interpret as a danger to like a public area, I don't believe that individuals should be subjected to burdens on those statements, right? I don't think.
Yeah, I'm never letting myself get Ed Milibanded. Okay. I'm never letting this happen.
No, I want my bacon. It's good for me.
Never letting this happen. It's ruined his entire election run.
Protected speech, and they should not be subjected to like additional checks at the airport because of their protected speech by the government.
Okay, I mean, I think that I think it really.
It was like a significant story in his election. Yeah.
How reasonable it is to.
I'm embellishing a little bit, but it was like a big thing.
Whether or not that protected speech aligns with some credible like threat to public safety. I think that in general, the bar is going to be really, really high for the types of speech I would say is warranting, right? Like for the Houthi line, I don't think a Houthi line would warrant it or anything like that. But
wait, so let's talk about the empirics here. So what is your empirical evidence that someone who makes the kind of statements that Hassan makes, that there's some link between that and actual material support of terrorism?
I personally don't believe it's reasonable to assume that Hassan on actually knowing.
No, I just fundamentally, I heard Noel say, I do fundamentally agree with Noel's position there that eating on camera, eating on mic is pretty bad. I have eaten on mic once or twice, but I do try and avoid like any eating with that can be perceived by stream. It is just gross to subject people to your eating.
Full scope of his opinions, I don't think it's reasonable to interpret him as being a threat to public safety.
At all, right? So and now
correct.
There's yes, I agree with that. I think that's right. So if you would agree, therefore, if they looked into his views or had some knowledge of his views, that it would be improper for them to detain him on the basis of those views.
Incorrect.
Or to subject him to incorrect.
No.
You don't.
And the reason why is because if you look up Hassan, you're probably just gonna look at a terrorist. Like all of his greatest hits, it just looks like he's like pro-terrorist. Like it's just straight up. If you Google this guy and you look him up, he looks insane. He looks absolutely insane if you look this guy up and the things that he said.
Dude,
I think the reason why I personally don't believe that he's a reasonable threat is because I know enough of the context with which he says most.
Power is the exact same as hard power. Soft power, embassies, diplomacy, exact same thing as military bases. I can't do this. I can't do this. Guy has the understanding of foreign policy of like a 12-year-old. What the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with this dude? Didn't he go to war and like literally lose his eye because some mujahideen, a brave fucking soldier, fucked his eye hole with their dick? Isn't that how he lost his fucking dumbass eye? Because he got his fucking eye hole fucked? By a brave soldier? Didn't he learn that there's a difference between like military bases and diplomacy?
Of his shit, and frankly, he's very rich, so I don't think he'd risk it. But like that's added that context, yeah. But the reason I'm drawing this distinction is because he's on margin. That's my point. The things that he has said publicly, I think rides the line of something where somebody reasonably in the CBP could think, man, this guy, he might be up to no good. I wouldn't support it. I don't think it would be correct.
Wait a second. So do you think that, I want to be clear, you agree everything Hassan said is protected by the First Amendment, right?
Huh? Yes, correct, yeah.
Okay. You wouldn't support him being detained on, you would support him being detained on those views, right?
Are you saying I would or wouldn't?
You would.
Would support. What I'm saying, no, not just off of his views alone, no.
Okay, so you would not support him being detained on the basis of his views, correct?
Not me specifically, like looking at it, no. Not like my moral position.
Okay.
What my argument is that his positions are on margin, where somebody looking at his positions, like if you Google his name, he should be flagged as somebody who is a risk. If you just Google it.
So, okay, so you think, so I'll ask this again then, not you specifically, you do think that the CBP should have stopped him for his views, is that right? Why not?
Because I think that if through further investigation, they could have done like more looking into him, and I'm probably just been like, hey, whatever, it's not a big deal. I don't think they probably should stop him.
Given what a reasonable officer would have known at the time, and given
He should be stopped,
what you said, he should be stopped. So you actually,
correct.
In other words, you do agree with the stopping, because obviously a CBP officer, an average CBP officer, isn't going to have the time to gather the kind of context that you've received. So you actually do support him being stopped.
Yeah, I think if you Google Hassan's name and like terrorism, and then you see like,
okay, it feels like Reddy's kind of contradicting himself here. It feels like he can't quite decide whether he thinks this was a justified stop or not.
Instances of him like supporting terrorist acts and stuff like that, I think it's pretty reasonable for a CBP officer to be like, hey, I'm just going to ask you a couple more questions.
How long does this go for?
Just to be clear though,
Oh,
you
goes
agree
for a
with him
while.
being stopped by CBP officers,
A long-ass debate.
on the basis of his views, right? Not just the questions.
I think it is, I agree that a reasonable person who Googles Hassan after stopping him would find probable cause to believe he could be a credible public threat.
Oh, you actually think that there's probable cause?
No. Sorry, I shouldn't use probable cause with a lawyer. There's reasonable grounds to believe that he poses a public threat.
There's reasonable grounds to believe that Hassan Piker poses a public threat because of what?
So why is Hassan mocking a former soldier for his injury a good thing again? I am retarded. Well, one, mocking anyone for anything can be funny. That's the first thing. Just because someone's a gay fucking US military vet with some gay fucking injury doesn't mean they're exempt from being laughed at. US military sucks. Since when did we start sucking off the US military? Troops suck. And then, yeah, it's Dan Crenshaw. Dan Crenshaw fucking sucks specifically.
Because of his online presence, if you Google him.
And when you say public threat, what do you mean by that?
Like a threat to public safety, like he could...
Dude, there is truly no more, like, despicable and unlikable type of person than like, the US military vet that did horrendous shit and just rants about it. That's, like, one of the most, like, just annoying, like, everyone sucks him off in their, like, day-to-day. It's like, thank you for your service. It's like, that. I understand why people talk shit on the US military when they have to see shit like that.
I had a dream the other night where Destiny and Vosh were both in my guild's post-raid Discord call. I was understandably confused and I went to tell Queeman about it, but he just got really angry with me and slammed the door.
Thank you for the $10. Thank you for the $10. Where's the what Sam Hyde clip do you mean? Yo, thank you for the £50.
Are Relevant still stuck in the DGG plantation of the mind? Sad. He just knows in his bones Hassan bad. Hassan derangement syndrome is very real.
Shackled thinking going on here, truly. Unfortunate stuff. We're trying to set Pisco trying to save Raleigh from the sunken place right now. Okay.
He supports terrorist organizations to the point where he could have met up with terrorists and might be bringing some kind of anything into the United States that would be considered illegitimate or would be under the purview of the CBP.
Wait, so you think that there's actually a reasonable person would think that Hassan would be smuggling in some terrorist device?
Potentially.
Do you think a reasonable person would, looking up Hassan, him coming back from Paris into Chicago, a reasonable person would say, yeah, he's bringing back some, it's probable, or it's let's say 30% chance he's bringing back some contraband from France.
Yeah, in some kind of means, way, or shape, sure. Yeah.
There's no evidence whatsoever that he received a device. There's no evidence that he met with someone who's problematic who gave him a device. There's no evidence whatsoever that a dog picked up or any kind of like scam.
He went to fucking France to meet the leader of like their leftist party or whatever, and then came back. Oh, why would that? He might have met up with Houthis and got a bomb in France. What?
He's not carrying a suspicious package. He's not, talking to anyone known to the government to be a terrorist threat. And you think a reasonable person would think that there's, a good enough basis to conclude that there's at least a decent chance that he's smuggling in some explosive or dangerous contraband?
No, reasonable enough to warrant asking him a couple more questions at a pretty routine and incredibly common, questioning. Yeah.
No, but to stop him.
Yes, in a similar manner that they do a tremendous amount of people, and they even do randomly. Supposedly randomly.
Okay. I mean, I think that's wild. So even just putting aside, so I want to step back.
So what I'm saying is, I agree with you, the ridiculousness of the idea that he's actually doing it. What I'm saying is that threshold meets enough for what I believe to be, in the current day and age, for a CBP officer to just ask him one or two more questions. And then upon asking those one or two more questions, he then, by his own admission, states that he wants to take him for a ride, and then proceeds to say things that are definitely going to warrant more questions. So what a CBP officer, so this is in my imagination, how this could have gone. CBP officer, in the hypothetical that the CBP officer knew who he was. Okay, yeah, we'll just say knew who he was, or whatever. Oh man, this guy, he's like crazy. He's on that pro-terrorism shit. And then bring him aside and then ask him maybe like one extra question, that might be pointing towards his political views. Hassan goes, I want to see how far this goes. And then offers up a question that makes it seem like he might be a little sus. And then the CBP officer goes, well, okay, ask him another question. Hassan gives us another sus response. Okay, ask another question. And that's how that's in my imagination how that would go. It's not like he's like getting fucking tackled inside of the airport because of his public opinions. It's just some officer goes, I'm going to ask this guy one more question at this totally routine thing that we do to like thousands of people a day.
Yeah. So let me just take a step back and say, we're gonna get back into the Hassan specific stuff in a second, because I think a lot of what you said I totally disagree with. But I want to be clear about something. Regardless of what the actual CBP officer thought, I believe that the questioning of Hassan or the stopping of Hassan is pursuant to a broader policy that is to chill speech. In other words, I believe that the CBP has instituted changes that are encouraging officers to...
There were literally like press releases about like wanting to stop like anti-Semitism or anti-American sentiment coming into the country and shit, right? There's been like so much shit about this. I swear.
On people's social media to see if they are against Trump and if they are against Israel. And so even if it were the case that the Hassan-specific CBP officer had no animus against people who are, let's say even he's pro-Palestinian, if he is enacting a policy that is, which purpose is to do viewpoint discrimination, I believe that to be a violation of Hassan's rights and to be against the First Amendment. So I want to be clear, even just stepping back, if you believe, as I do, that there is an overarching policy by CBP to target individuals on the basis of their support for or against, being against Israel or being against Trump, then regardless of the particulars of Hassan's situation, assuming that Hassan's situation is pursuant to that policy, it itself would be chilling First Amendment speech, and because of the illegitimate purpose there. So I just wanted to take overall, even if I granted everything in the specifics of Hassan's situation, I think his specific situation is influenced by a broader policy whose purpose is to chill speech. Now, getting back into the actual specifics of what's happening with Hassan, I think that you're being a little unfair here. What I think you're being unfair is just because of the same reason.
Dude, what is this? You understand that with the execution of 2 civilians by Free Palestine, jihad has come to America, yes? The rest of you understand where we are, yes? She's so insane. It's crazy. Jihad has come to America. Some Mexican killed 2 Israeli diplomats. Jihad has come to America.
You think that Hasan is not actually a threat. You say it's informed by this greater context. I think the specific problematic statements of Hasan are also informed by your particular context, right? You have done the deep dive into the Houthi pirate stuff, right? You've done the deep dive into...
I would say looking into I would say on its face, Hasan looks worse. Like looking at his like history on its face looks worse, because if you Google like some of the quotes that this guy has, like for instance, what is it? America deserved 9/11. Like, if you just read that as a CBP officer, you're like, ooh, that's not a good look, bro.
Wait a second. You're not going to Google that, right? You're not going to Google Hasan Piker 9/11. You're going to Google Hasan Piker.
Yeah, and then you're going to find a quote that says like Hasan Piker said. Huh?
So if you go Hasan Piker, you go to his Wikipedia. You know, it says he's born with Turkish parents in New Jersey, grew up in Istanbul. It says he's like a media person. He went to Rutgers. He graduated cum laude. He purchased a really super expensive Hollywood house. He worked for the Young Turks. He streams on Twitch. Like, where are you going to get all this like problematic stuff? You know, maybe there's more on the Wikipedia stuff. You know, okay, here we go on the Wikipedia. In the same stream, Piker criticized American foreign policy and made controversial comments related to September 11, 2001, saying America deserved 9/11. So just to be clear, if he said America deserves 9/11, should he be subjected to additional questions or stopping because he said America deserved 9/11?
Alone, no.
Okay.
The point that I'm making is a great. So like this is overarching. This is my statement. If I go on my stream very publicly, say America deserved 9/11, there's nothing wrong. I see nothing wrong with Hezbollah. Constantly defend the leader of Hezbollah who was assassinated by the Israelis. Talk about Israel's genocide against Palestinians. And I support Hamas. And I go through and I say the people inside the Red Sea are actually not doing the Houthis are not doing anything wrong in the Red Sea, and it's actually morally justified. And if you disagree, you're a Zionist. And I consistently defend this over the course of like several very public, very explosive debates.
I don't think you ever said that.
I get one or two. Well, let me just finish. And I get 1 or 2 more questions at the border. I am totally not going to be surprised.
Why does Riley keep throwing in that if you disagree, you're a Zionist? He keeps saying that like Hasan actually said. I don't think Hasan's ever said if you don't support the Houthis, you're a Zionist.
That is a yes.
Whether you're surprised doesn't matter.
That is a total expectation.
So I just want to clear up something. I don't consider this to be a conversation about whether or not you support, whether or not something is surprising. Okay, I don't care whether it's surprising or not. So you know, like it's not surprising to me if cops break the law with regularity. It's not surprising to me if CBP officer discriminates based on race or ethnicity or religion. Okay, so it's not, to me, it's not about whether something is surprising. The question is whether or not we believe it was based on his views. And it sounds like what you're saying is these are based on his views, but it's okay to ask these questions.
No, to be clear, I don't know if it was based on his views, and we'd be trusting his word, and we already have reason to believe his word is not, frankly, to be trusted.
Okay, so can you think of any legitimate purpose to ask if he supports Trump?
If his questions lead to a specific dialogue that the CBP officer believes could be fruitful to like proxy like through that. I don't know. I could think of a specific context, like, huh?
To what end? To what end?
To what end?
What's the proper purpose of the questioning?
The idea would be maybe to keep him talking. Maybe he seemed joyful to. So pretty commonly through like police interrogations or whatever, they'll ask like dumb, stupid lines of questioning, but they'll do it to be able to create a rapport.
Yeah. So when you're asked, if you think that he's asked, do you support Donald Trump? Do you support Trump? You think more likely than not that question was just like social lubricant.
I never said more likely than not. You simply asked me what is a hypothetical idea where that could lead, and I gave you, I would say, a very reasonable one.
Sorry. Do you think it's reasonable that when they asked him whether or not he supported Trump, that they were doing so for social lubricant?
I don't even know if they fucking did it. Again, we have no reason to trust this guy's word. I genuinely don't know.
If they asked him, so I'm assuming, right? So if they asked him whether or not he supports Trump, do you think that it's reasonable to think that they asked that question as just?
I truly don't know. I'd have to see the context of the conversation. If he seemed as joyous as he did, talking about, I'm going to see where this goes. I'm going to see, I decided at that moment I was going to take this CBP officer down a ride. I could see a CBP officer getting that energy, that aura off of him and being like, okay, this guy really likes to talk about how much he hates the government. What do you think of Trump? Well, let me actually, let me tell you about how I fucking hate that guy, that fucking fascist. And he'd be like, yeah, I'm getting something out of him. Yeah. So, like, yes, I could legitimately see a circumstance.
Hasan didn't say that he wanted to prompt inappropriate questions. He said he was answering the questions
slow this down
so as to see where they were going. Not
normal speed. Just while I grab a coffee, I'm still listening.
That he was going to try to provoke the CBP officer. It's the opposite.
I think that was the implication I got from it, is that he was.
Fuck that. That's so stupid.
Okay.
No, that's not true. Hassan Piker. So Piker didn't say that. So Piker said this. So on Twitter, we went through this before.
Oh, I'm talking about on camera, on video. Actually, it might have been on stream.
I will put. Yep, I know exactly which part of the clip. It's at like 23 minutes. I'll get that for you. But just to be clear, I want to get both of the statements. So the first statement is responding to this guy who writes for the.
To be clear, you asked me if it was reasonable in the context of talking to Hassan that the CBP officer could use a "do you like Trump" as a social lubricant. And I give you an example that I thought would be, yes, very palpable as to that.
If Hassan Piker raised the issue of his support for Trump in the first instance, then I wouldn't have a problem as social. I think that it would make sense for the CBP officers perhaps to be like, "Oh,
can I give
like
you
Trump,
a hypothetical then?
Yeah. But I don't think that happened.
If Hassan seemed really willing to talk about how much he hated the Trump administration, would it make sense to you then for the CBP officer to ask if he likes Trump as a social lubricant?
So if Hassan brought up his hatred of the administration before, then I think it would make sense for the CBP officer as social lubricant to like, I don't know, just riff off of that. But that's not what he said happened. He didn't say that happened. He said that he was asked whether he supports the president.
I don't know if he laid out a specific chronology, but even let's assume that he didn't bring up the Trump administration specifically. I don't think he even has to do that specifically. I think he can just genuinely believe that this statement, like maybe he provided some answers that would make him believe that he didn't like the Trump administration, maybe nothing specific about the Trump administration.
So what would the
then he
purpose
could have
be?
asked that question.
Okay, I'm back.
Because the thing is, it sounds like you believe there really isn't any context where you could bring up his support or ask his support of Trump as a social.
You could.
Okay, I think there's a lot of scenarios where that would make sense as a social.
So if you had an indication, if you had some indication to believe that Trump posed a threat to the president, that's one. If you believed if it, as a social lubricant, if that were actually the purpose of it, that would be fine. If it were related to some verification rationale, that is, we want to see if you support Trump to see if you're actually Hassan Piker, that would be fine. I can also think of the various scenarios in which it might be appropriate. It might be appropriate to ask whether he supports Trump. But
wait, I'm sorry.
Wait, what's this Jack Wally retard in chat? What's he saying? He committed no crime or will be found innocent by the courts. Okay, it's not. I don't think you're quite aware of what's going on here. The case that he's currently fighting is not a criminal case, it's a civil case. So you wouldn't be found innocent or guilty. You might be found liable. I don't know why you would assume he's going to be cleared, other than you're just saying because he's fighting it. If you assume everyone that fights a case is innocent, you would be incredibly retarded.
Did you say as verification for whether or not he is a
he's literally admitted to doing the things that he's accused of, aside from the non-consensual recording.
It would be fine?
Yes.
Why couldn't he ask then about like the Houthis or other terrorist groups?
He's better than Hassan in every possible way. Well, that's not true, is it? Hassan's way more attractive, way taller, way stronger, way more socially capable. He's got way more friends. He's got way more money. What else is there? He's probably not got... yeah, I won't even... There's a bunch of other things I could just list off. I'm not going to go that crazy right now. But yeah, we probably think of a few other things that either didn't happen to Hassan or ailments he doesn't suffer. Got a full beard.
because that's not the actual purpose of the question, right? The actual purpose of the Houthi questions, the actual purpose of asking about Trump, the actual purpose is not to verify whether this person in front of him sitting is actually Hassan Piker. What I'm giving you are hypothetical, legitimate rationales to ask these certain questions. So it hypothetically could be legitimate to ask.
How are you guys celebrate Pride Month? Me and my friend Hassan are going to a festival, okay, a Pride festival.
For verification purposes, it's about the purpose of the question.
Okay, and you believe the purpose of the
believe that-
questions is to chill speech?
Yes, it's part of a broader policy to chill speech. Yes.
Okay.
That's clearly the most likely outcome. And so I just want to give you, walk through some of these through. Do you think that part of asking whether or not he supports Trump, that they could have asked it because they feared that he was a threat to Trump in any respect?
Do I think it would be reasonable to interpret that he would be a... No.
That the reason these CBP officers are asking this is because okay.
I don't think any extreme stretch of his views would...
right. You think they're asking that question to verify his identity, right?
I don't know. I'm a horrible person to ask those like specific questions because I've never been through the process. I don't know what like is the standard operating procedure for an influencer or something like that. If we assume that he knows who he is, maybe it could be that they ask a bunch of really weird questions when they're talking about like an influencer. I don't know.
Whether they do or not, it doesn't matter. Like I do not want to get bogged
Wait,
down
Red
in
Bar's
what
friends
is
with Hassan
likely for a
too?
CBP officer to do in general, whether they violate rights generally, whether you should be surprised.
I wouldn't have stolen that bit
That's not at all the
unknowingly.
inquiry, whether or not
That'd be very fucking annoying.
It is relevant.
Well,
that
no,
the
it's
Trump
relevant
administration-
having to do with the predictability of this. And the reason why I care about the predictability is because I don't think it's wrong to ask you a question to verify who you are, even if it's something like, hey...
We're all friends, fuck it. We're all going Pride together
Trump?
this year.
As long as you're
okay.
capable of being able to be like, hey, no.
I gave you that rationale, and my question is: do you think that when they ask the question, "Do you support Trump?" that they're doing so to verify his identity, to verify this is Hassan?
I actually
likely,
do not
right?
know. I genuinely could not say. I don't know what the standard procedure is for a political influencer to go through a customs. I unironically don't.
So you think that it's possible that when he was asked, "Do you support Trump?" that the reason could be, let's make sure that this person sitting in front of us, let's verify that he's Hassan Piker, and obviously Hassan Piker would say that he doesn't support Trump, and so that's why we're asking whether he supports Trump.
I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely. I think it's far more likely it was like a
it's
social
unlikely,
lubricant.
Right? So it's, in other words, it's unlikely. Fair?
Yeah, I would say it's unlikely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So it's unlikely that they were asking this because they thought he was like a threat to Trump. Unlikely that they're asking this because to verify his identity. And so the only other alternative is as some kind of social lubricant, they're asking him whether he supports Trump. I think that is unlikely given the context. I think what's likely given the context is that there's a broad policy from CBP to inquire into individuals who don't support Trump and have been vocal against Trump. And they're asking this question as part of that policy. And that policy is intrinsically viewpoint discriminatory. And so that's what I think the purpose of the question is. Alternatively, perhaps it's to get to the underlying material support of the Houthi situation, but that I believe to be illegitimate because the only evidence they have of material
Sorry,
support of the
I
Houthis
was reading
is
something. What did
constitute
Bradley say?
lubricant.
Maybe I need to turn the speed down. I read something and I hear. I don't hear.
I think it's far more likely it was like we don't.
So you think that it's possible that when he was asked, "Do you support Trump?" that the reason could be, let's make sure that this person sitting in front of us, let's verify that he's Hassan Piker, and obviously Hassan Piker would say that he doesn't support Trump, and so that's why we're asking whether he supports Trump.
I think it's possible. I don't think it's likely. I think it's far more likely it was like a
it's
social
unlikely,
lubricant.
Right? So it's, in other words, it's unlikely. Fair?
Yeah, I would say it's unlikely. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. So it's unlikely that they were asking this because they thought he was like a threat to Trump. Unlikely that they're asking this because to verify his identity. And so the only other alternative is as some kind of social lubricant, they're asking him whether he supports Trump. I think that is unlikely given the context. I think what's likely given the context is that there's a broad policy from CBP to inquire into individuals who don't support Trump and have been vocal against Trump. And they're asking this question as part of that policy. And that policy is intrinsically viewpoint discriminatory. And so that's what I think the purpose of the question is. Alternatively, perhaps it's to get to the underlying material support of the Houthi situation. But that I believe to be illegitimate because...
So if Hassan was the only one saying this happened to him, it would be one thing. When we've got statements from the government talking about how they want to crack down anti-American and anti-Semitic sentiment coming into the country, when we've got numerous cases of people being either turned away at the border, deported, or subject to additional questioning, to then say, No, I think Hassan they were just trying to chat with him. It was just like just small talk. It's like, okay, well if we agree this happened, I don't think that's very likely.
The only evidence they have of material support to the Houthis is his stated First Amendment views, and so that's basically what I think. It's like this all amounts to what's likely
to be clear,
discrimination.
you believe that right now the CBP has a policy that isn't expressly stated that or a fair number of CBP officers follow, where they ask every single person about who they have any reason to believe doesn't like Trump about Trump.
No, I don't. You're stating it in categorical terms of like everybody's asked all these questions.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I'm trying to say I'm trying to avoid that because what I could have said is that there's this shadow policy that the CBP has where all of their officers ask people who they believe don't like Trump if they like Trump. What I tried to state is that there's just like a fair number of CBP officers who have this, because you agree the policy isn't written. There's no policy that says ask people about Trump.
Sorry. I don't agree that this policy is not written. I don't agree with that.
Okay, so there is currently a policy that says if you believe somebody doesn't like Trump, ask them about Trump.
I'm agnostic as to whether that policy is explicitly stated somewhere, whether it's word of mouth.
Okay, that would 100% come out in an investigation by now. There's
wait, Jack, you don't care about doxing and death threats. You're a DGG. Why are you pretending you care about doxing and death threats?
Oh, earthly way that it is standard CBP policy.
Into it.
Huh? A whistleblower would almost certainly do that. Like, you're talking about, what, tens of thousands of employees that would need to keep that secret?
Yeah, so I have not said that this policy has been dispersed to every single CBP officer. I have not said that this that the policy is in one particular place or not, or whether it comes from on high. I have not stated that the policy is not stated in a formal memorandum. I'm not giving any indication about in what manner the policy comes from. I just do think that there is a policy to discriminate and chill certain views. For example, you agree that there is a policy currently to chill viewpoint that are against Israel. Agree? No. There is that policy.
I want to be very specific. I believe there is a policy about going after terrorists. I just think that this administration believes First Amendment protected, genuinely okay speech is terrorism. That's my point. Okay? It's not that I believe that the Trump administration has a policy specifically to chill speech. I genuinely don't think that they're doing this thing where they're like, no, we actually don't believe any of these people are pro-terror. We just don't want them to say this. I think that these people are going with this propaganda, and I would support this based on talking to a litany of conservatives who genuinely diehard agree with the idea that Mahmoud Khalil, for the things that just being in the group, he is like a terrorist. Just being in the group. That's enough. And he's pro-terrorist.
What is this Max tweet? I can't even pull this shit up, man. Has anyone seen the @federal rape tweet about 17 minutes ago? I can't describe it properly. You got to be kidding me. Rape 1 million. Hey, bro, don't say that, bro. 6 million. Dude.
Get him out. And I think the people in office that are pushing this shit think the same thing. I don't think they're I want to.
Go look at @federal rape. @federal rape.
These people are pro-terror.
Speech is terrorism.
Huh?
Wait, no. Sorry. So you just said there are people who say that Mahmoud Khalil is a terrorist just by being in the group, right? So you're saying the administration is equating speech to terrorism.
Correct.
And they're just trying to chill terrorism, which they take to be speech. Some kinds of speech are terrorism. I mean, to me, that's a distinction without a difference. I mean, I think that they're trying to stop.
I think that's really important here.
No, it's not actually. They're trying to stop what normal people would consider speech. Whether there's an idiosyncratic vision from the administration to target what they take to be terrorism, but what normal people consider to be speech and not terrorism and not conduct, right? So it doesn't matter whether they call it terrorism. If what normal people construe as speech is trying to be chilled, then it doesn't matter that the administration classifies it as terrorism. Agreed?
Well, I don't think it's I don't think you could just simply say normal people. I think there's tens of millions of people that agree that that's pro-terror. And that's the issue.
No, that's not. So I'm not talking about whether speech is pro-terrorism. I'm saying, do you think that normal people would consider speech in favor of Hamas to itself be terrorism?
The speech itself?
Yeah,
No,
the speech
no,
itself.
I don't think they would assume. And to be clear, sorry, to be ironclad clear, I don't think the Trump administration believes that's terrorism in and of itself. The reason what I mean is that speech is being used to say that they are pro-terrorist and a threat to national security.
Okay, so you agree do you agree they're trying to chill what they consider to be pro-terrorist speech?
I think that's a byproduct. I don't believe that's what they're trying to, like, that's their express purpose.
Okay.
I think what they're trying to do, I think, and the reason why I feel like this distinction matters is because when we look at the intent of people.
I don't understand. What is he trying to say the intent of the Trump admin is in instituting these changes? Because it seems like he agrees there is a broad effort to do something here. There have been changes implemented by Trump somehow, or people under Trump. So, what's the goal there? I try to hear clearly what really thinks the goal is.
I think it more holistically encapsulates all of their actions when they just genuinely think that this pro-Palestinian speech, being a part of these groups or whatever, amounts to terrorist sympathizing. And because they're terrorist sympathizing, they are a threat to national security. And
okay, so he actually thinks that the Trump admin is doing this out of a genuine concern for national security. Okay.
Using that speech to say they are sympathizing with terrorists. Right? And they don't like that speech, not because they want to just chill the speech, but because they want to chill terrorist sympathizing. That manifests or it reveals itself through the speech.
Do you think that the Trump administration is trying to discourage some speech?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, they banned the Associated Press from the fucking press pool for saying the Gulf of Mexico is the Gulf of Mexico.
So now let's take the Israel-Palestine situation. Do you think the administration is trying to discourage anti-Israel speech?
Okay, so yes. Yes, I would say that. But
okay.
That's, I'm assuming, me and you understanding what it actually means to be anti-Israel versus or like actual material or actionable pro-terrorist speech. What they view as anti-Israel in this context would be pro or terrorist sympathizing to the amount to a threat to national security.
Whether they think speech amounts to a threat to national security doesn't affect whether it's speech, right?
Correct.
Okay, so they can think whatever they want about the dangerousness of the speech. Doesn't affect whether it's speech, right?
Yeah, but they would argue that the speech meets merit to, under their right of law, be able to deport some of these people.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. That's what they think. But I think you and I disagree about that, and we think that that's viewpoint discrimination.
Correct.
Notwithstanding that they have particular views about this speech and its level of dangerousness, and whether or not it's advisable, whether or not we like this speech, whether or not it's a proxy for someone who is likely to be a terrorist or whatever. But however you want to call it, and I think you just agreed to it.
Hold on.
The administration currently has a policy to chill some kinds of anti-Israel speech. Fair?
My bad. I just realized something because I'm really stupid to be able to get it. I don't believe they're trying to chill speech. I think they're looking at the speech that is being used and they're trying to chill terrorism. So just to be clear, I think that they don't care what they say. They care that what they say communicates an underlying terrorist sympathizer mindset.
So they're not trying to chill. I understand that distinction. What you're saying is,
I can't believe people are actually like mind fucked into arguing this kind of thing about the Trump admin by hating us on. No, I think they try to chill terrorism. Really? Really? You think there's like an actual threat of like, you know, huge terrorism that needs to be stopped, people coming into the country? No. No. Terror attacks on US soil are pretty rare. Especially from, you know, foreign countries. There's not any real concern of fucking terrorism, dude. You know there's not. You know it's just you must know deep down the terrorism shit is just a vehicle to go after pro-Palestine speech or anti-Israel speech or anti-America speech.
I'm going to repeat it. You're saying they're not really trying to chill speech. They're just using speech in what they view as a rational way to target people likely to commit terrorism or to be
correct. Exactly.
Okay. So, so I understand what you're saying. I understand the distinction that you're trying to raise. So I'll ask the question. So the answer is, and the truth is, you don't think they're trying to chill anti-Israel speech?
That's their intent. No, I don't think that's their intent. No, I don't think their intent is anti-Israel speech. We need to crack down on it, and that must be done.
Yeah,
I think their intent. I think they genuinely think they're cracking down on terrorism.
I think they're imposing burdens on individuals based on their speech.
I agree. We agree with that. We both agree on that.
And they might be able to conceptualize it as, well, it's not that we want less of it. It's that but the truth is they probably do want less of it, right? They want less of this speech.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the goal in doing it. So they are
it's
trying to chill speech through government action, right?
That is something that I'm sure that they're very
Right.
happy about, is there's less anti-Israel speech. They don't like anti-Israel speech, but I don't view
They don't want Harvard to. They don't want any of these universities. They want less protests against Israel. They want these universities to stop tolerating anti-Israel protests, right?
Yes, I think they do, but on that basis, I believe that they would rationalize that they believe, and a lot of conservatives believe this as well, that in those protests, they're all like beating up poor Israeli students, and like at every single protest, they're just like beating the shit out of every Jew that they see. Like, if you listen to conservatives,
No, they don't
talk
even
about
think that.
these-
No way. They do not think it's happening at everyone. They just want the protests stopped. They don't care if they're beating people up, if they're even obstructing something or whatever. They don't care. They literally don't give it. They just want the protests stopped. That's obviously the case. They hate that there's a bunch of students that have a critical or negative view of America.
like on campus protests, makes it sound like it's like Antifa black bagging every Jew that they can.
Well, if they are trying to, well, I think you're being very charitable to the Trump administration here.
I don't think so. I'm calling them all fucking retarded. They have no media literacy.
No,
they
not.
literally can't look at footage.
You might be calling them retarded, but at the same time, you're saying there's like a genuine concern for national security that's motivating these decisions.
That's what what I'm saying is that they're not like maliciously calculated. I don't
I've
think
seen that
that's
clip
what's
for Radio
happening.
Harmony. We will
I
update
think they are maliciously calculated. I also don't think that.
I don't think they're maliciously calculated on this. The malicious calculation might come with like media representation, how they talk about it in the media and stuff like that. But like their actual actions, I think that's what they believe.
I mean, I'll give you the example of law firms. They're attacking law firms and imposing burden on law firms and on people who do business with law firms who have represented people who are anti-Trump or who have
I think that's
on
malicious.
anti-administration policies.
Yeah, I think that's maliciously targeted. To be
Yeah,
clear, I'm not saying
You're doing really cool. I noticed you got real quiet when you went J-Stock stream and then dipped quickly. I've got no idea, man. I never know with any of these people how cool I am with them. Okay. DGGs or ex-DGGs. I never know. I've not had any specific issues with Relly, as far as I know. Did I beat Relly in a debate? I don't remember.
Everything that the Trump, I'm just isolating it to this specific thing. We could go down a long list of Trump specifically targeting people specifically because they've done him wrong.
Yeah, so for the anti-Palestine, the anti-Israel protesters,
yep.
I think they are trying to impose a burden on U.S. principals, on foreign citizens, on people arriving at the border because of their speech. And what you've said is, okay, but maybe there's some, to be clear on this, right? So are you suggesting that it's legitimate to question Hassan about these matters to get to what, right? To get to what? What is the ultimate purpose behind the line of questioning related to Houthis, and his.
I think a reasonable
What you take
CBP
it-
officer could find it warrantable to ask Hassan additional questioning, the ends of trying to see if he is maybe he had contact with some kind of possible terrorist, or if he's bringing in a device or something like.
So you would say something similar, for example, of basically, what about any and because he said them specifically of like the Houthis and Hamas, you would distinguish that from any pro-Palestinian person?
Of course.
So, but any a pro-Palestinian person who has consistently expressed moral support for the actions of Hamas, you would say a reasonable CBP officer should ask if they're abroad, if they've made a contact, for the purpose of underlying that.
Probably not, because I don't
trying-
think they. Well, how would it come to their attention?
Yeah. Assume that any public person, any person who has publicly said that Hamas is justified in their actions, we support Hamas, we think Hamas is good, and who goes abroad and comes back, whether they're a citizen or not. But
No, this is normal
also just
speed, I
limited
think.
to U.S. citizen. You think that if the Trump administration made a policy, if they wrote down the policy that, assume that they wrote down a policy that says if you support publicly Hamas and you go abroad, you when you come back, get into this line so we can ask you questions if you've met with some Hamas agent. You think that would be legal to do if they did it?
Legal? Would it be legal? I mean, you could tell me if it's illegal. I don't think it would be like. I don't think it'd be wrong if they asked additional questioning. No.
So even
It
if there
has to
was
be
a written
near the
policy-
merit of. I'm using specifically Hassan as a barometer, as not somebody who's making like offhanded comments. I differentiated between the Subway guy who in a private Discord is like, you know what, actually Hamas is not that bad, versus somebody
Yeah,
who's
fucking J Silk literally still owes me $20. Dude, thank you for reminding me. Holy fuck. I do. J Silk does still owe me $20. You're totally right. He even tried to extend it more. He was like, "Yeah, I should look. Okay, man.
consistent, prolonged content, stuff like that, supporting the action.
Okay.
Like, this guy has hundreds of documented hours.
You're right, Louis. I should have bet more. I should have had. I didn't have enough faith in my good friend Hassan. I should have bet more. It should have been like $100 bet.
Hundreds of hours talking about and justifying terrorist acts, justifying or downplaying the negative outcomes of.
The bet was whether Hassan had ever said he supports the Houthis. Not the Houthis, Hamas. He supports Hamas. Obviously, the Houthis. It was Hamas, specifically. If he's ever said that he supports Hamas, that was the bet.
Terrorist acts.
And I always said he hasn't. And Jason said he has. And Jason could not find a clip of him saying he has.
We're not talking about your average Joe Schmo here. Nobody, almost nobody, is going to have as much legwork as Hassan for this type of speech. Outside of like actual terrorists, there's going to be very few.
So when I gave you the example of the Shia Muslim, you said no because it's too attenuated. There's not enough of a likelihood that an individual who's a Shia Muslim it's not enough evidence, right?
Correct.
Because just okay. So what is your empirical evidence that someone who is situated like Hassan is likely to go to France to meet with a Hamas representative? What's the empirical evidence of that?
I don't
that
believe
would
there
tend
is.
to
Yeah, the end
show-
date's passed.
So do you have any evidence that would indicate someone in Hassan's position
No, saying Israel is worse than Hamas does not count. No.
would be more likely to go or some degree of likelihood, right? Because you agree Shia Muslims are more likely probably to have made those contacts as well. And so what's the evidence that there's a really, really good propensity for someone in Hassan's position to meet with a Hamas representative or some like a terrorist representative abroad such that it would justify that line of questioning?
Not from my point of view, no. I want to make a distinction because maybe this is the critical distinction. Whenever I make a judgment call about anything in all of reality, there's a margin that I find to be acceptable for disagreement that I'm just like, okay, whatever. It's really not that big of a deal. Right? Like it's the margin of disagreement there is like whatever. So like for instance, this disagreement we're having, right? There's an amount to as for like we talked about the random person, the cop showing up to the house and stuff. Where we find our margin for disagreement for at what amount of online social media jargon or rhetoric is going to make it permissible for a cop to say, hey, what's up? What's going on? Show up to your house. That is acceptable to me. It's like, I understand society is going to operate in that range. And so that's why I say, like, it's to be expected. That's why I use language like this. Not a big deal. It's to be expected. And that is what I believe for this instance. I don't think there's any justification to stop us on, detain us on, arrest us on, or God forbid anything else. I don't think there's any reasonable grounds to believe that or to do any of that. However, I can see how somebody who has a specific perspective, a specific angle that they're looking at him.
J-Stalk just banned me for reminding him he owes Queeman $20 and posted the dono link.
I can see how somebody could think there is a cause to ask him one or two more questions. And that is just based on how the Google searches come in when you look up his name.
To see whether or not he made contact with a terrorist?
Yeah, or smuggling a device or something, whatever specific details they want to specifically look for. Yeah, I'd see how somebody could think that, yeah.
And if there were a written policy that said something like to the effect of, hey, it's okay for you guys, and we encourage you all to, if you happen to know someone who's crossing the border, has previously stated support for Hamas, has previously stated support for the Houthis, stop them and ask them a question if they've made contact with an individual from there. You think that policy, if it were written down, would be acceptable to you?
No, I don't think it would be acceptable.
Why not?
Because I don't think just simply saying, again, the subway worker who is just randomly on his Discord account posted, you know what, Hamas is actually not too bad, actually. I don't think that should warrant a stoppage.
Yeah, but what are the odds here, right? So if it does warrant it to be consistently in favor of the Houthis in a public way, in a very, very public way, because you have a larger platform than the subway worker, why are you distinguishing between those two? Because I would imagine
because one shows a more fervent fanatical or a more fervent support that could err on the side of fanaticism. Is it so? Basically, in two comparable potential hypotheticals, let's say that we're looking at a alt-right mass shooter, right? And one dude watched Nick Fuentes and he says, yeah, I think Nick Fuentes is actually pretty funny. It's actually funny. And then the other guy says, I actually love Nick Fuentes. I watch all of his different things. I watch this, I watch that. I actually have Nick Fuentes collectibles. And actually, I talked and debated with a bunch of people about how Nick Fuentes is actually really fucking base and all this shit. I'm not just going to go, oh, both of them watch Nick Fuentes. Surely they're like, whatever. Literally, some of my normie friends think Nick Fuentes is funny. You want to know why? Nick Fuentes is fucking funny. But the person who's trying really fucking hard to talk about how funny and likable Nick Fuentes is, I'm going to look at you a little funny when I'm looking for like an alt-right mass shooter. Like, yeah.
Okay. Oh. So, but you don't concede that he was asked questions pursuant to a policy of chilling speech, and you don't even accept that he was asked questions about his political beliefs at all, and you think it's possible that he like prompted it himself.
I think that's very possible. Yeah. Yeah. I would just want to see like whatever. I have no reason to believe anything.
Damn. Well, I don't know.
I have no reason to believe anything other than he was detained in questions, right? I believe that's confirmed.
Yeah, but like, why? Right? So like, why? So is he lying about political things coming up at all? You don't think he's lying about that?
Probably not. No.
Why wouldn't he lie about that?
Why would he lie about that?
Why would he not lie about that if he's willing to lie about anything?
Why would he not? I'm sorry. I'm not using him talking about him being asked political questions as Oh, well, he was obviously asked.
Dude, this goes on so long. I can't want to see the end of it, but it's actually just like so like. It's just one of those debates where every point, every single minutia is being hashed out, and like that, Pisco's having to walk him through like everything.
I'm just saying that if Hassan Piker was pulled over at CBP, I could straight up see somebody recognizing him and asking him political questions just off rip.
Yeah, no, that to me strikes me as true and possible. I think he was asked political questions. And I think he was asked political questions because the administration has a policy now that they're going through social media accounts, even of U.S. citizens, and using their immigration authorities specifically to go after people who are against Israel. That's what I think is more likely than, oh, this is just completely random and coincidental. I think it's likely pursuant to a stated or unstated policy of going after people if they've expressed views, whether that's intentionally to chill speech or in good faith to stop terrorism, however you want to cash out the intent. They're doing a policy to go after people who've expressed anti-Israel sentiments.
So I don't agree with it just being anti-Israel. I think it's anti-Israel to the point where they interpret it as pro-Hamas and pro-terrorists to the point of like national security threat.
So I just saw Riley's actually on a WIC panel right now about the diplomat shooting. Look at the thumbnail WIC chose here. Why? It's like so low res as well. It's like this selfie of them grinning. I don't. Such a bizarre picture to choose. I didn't watch the BE video yet, no.
Make reasonable in any way,
so
shape, or form.
You're just not going to understand what's going on and just be like,
okay. I can't. We might try and watch both of these. I don't know.
My substantiation.
We'll try and finish this
one
first.
Do you think that they would stop, or do you think that they would question Destiny or investigate Destiny on his for the basis of anti-Israel speech? Because he has said bad things about Israel.
I think it's. I actually think that is because they're using AI and other tools. I think it's more likely, perhaps, that he be flagged if they're going to do the flagging of the stop. But I think that because
Destiny said so much anti-Israel stuff, like they probably shouldn't kill all the kids, or it wouldn't be genocide if they nuked Palestine.
Israel. I think it's much less likely that he be asked specifically about his views on Israel and on.
I think the flagging would be more to do with being. I would say it's less anti-Israel and it's more pro-Palestinian. That's what I'd probably say.
It's the flagging is more for people who are pro-Palestinian.
Yeah, more pro-Palestinian and less anti-Israel. Maybe that's just like pulling hairs.
They're flagging people, right? So Ozturk, Rameza Ozturk, she co-wrote an op-ed critical of Israel and her school's response. In no way was it endorsing Hamas. In no way was it endorsing terrorism. And notwithstanding that fact, she had her visa revoked. Now, why and how would they do that, right? Do you think that they did that because they thought that she was supporting Hamas or Hezbollah? No, I think the answer is they're doing it because...
No way. No way, dude. What?
Now, why and how would they do that, right? Do you think that they did that because they thought that she was supporting Hamas or Hezbollah? No, I think the answer is they're doing it because...
Dude. From an op-ed that does not support Hamas, does not say anything crazy, just says that the university should like boycott and divest for Israel. That's all it was.
You think that they're doing it?
If you missed it, go back. 6 people saying missed it.
Yes,
Pay attention.
I think that they're doing it because they believe that she's Hamas.
Because they construe anyone who is pro-Palestinian as pro-Hamas?
Correct.
So then, therefore, you would say that under this administration, if they equate pro-Palestinian to pro-Hamas, then they have a policy, a specific policy in the case of student visas of targeting pro-Palestinians. Fair?
Correct.
No, obviously the fundamental point of the nuking thing is technically true. I don't think America were committing a genocide when they nuked Japan because that goal was not to destroy the group in whole or in part. The goal was to cause a surrender, was to induce surrender. So technically, you could nuke an entire country and wipe out everyone in that country, and it might not be a genocide because the intent's not there. Technically.
Okay. Under that condition, what you think is most likely in that situation, I think that it's much more likely that this policy of being targeting of pro-Palestinian people is carrying through to the context of CBP. And I don't think that's a leap at all. because I think CBP is probably already.
Yeah, I could believe that there's some a lot of pro that CBP has. Some of that I could believe it. I don't know. Like, I wouldn't feel as confident saying that this is the case, but yeah, I could see that being the case for sure.
This is why, right? Because you agree that CBP probably has received instructions to, and they've already done it, by the way. They've already done it of certain professors and certain people, right? Non-citizens. We're talking about non-citizens right now. I'm talking about non-citizens. Non-citizens have been denied entry because of their views on Israel-Palestine. So they have the means, right, to discriminate against people who have particular views on this conflict. And CBP has already been given instructions to not let in people who are pro-Palestinian. And I'll tell you right now, a lot of people have canceled flights into America, have been wiping away their social media feeds because they understand that them being pro-Palestinian, that CBP is going to give them a harder time because they're screening for that, right?
I don't know if people are specifically not coming to the U.S. for that purpose, but if I was coming to the U.S. and I had pro-Palestinian posts, I would definitely be expecting a hard time through customs.
Right, because what's going on is the CBP has been given instructions. They have been given marching orders, and those marching orders are to scrutinize the people entering the country to see if they're pro-Palestinian. And if they are pro-Palestinian, they are turning people away, denying visas on the basis of those views. Already CBP is doing that.
I believe that to be the case.
So in that context, my prior is that policy is continuing to U.S. citizens. And I think that there's no separation here between their policy, CBP's policy, as to non-citizens, where they're already discriminating against people who are pro-Palestinian, in your words and my words as well. I think that the more likely situation is this is carrying forward to
one that is indicative of the greater, broader policy.
Well,
I agree that it could be that Hassan's troubles at the border.
What are you saying F for? Well, how am I effing? It doesn't say there's anything wrong. I haven't had anything come up as saying it dropped. Must be YouTube.
In time and duration, whatever, could be part of something that isn't consistent to the trend. But I just want to show you, or I want to cite a post from the DHS. The DHS said this on April 9th, 2025. Today, USCIS will begin considering aliens, quote, anti-Semitic activity on social media and the physical harassment of Jewish individuals as grounds for denying immigration benefit requests. This will immediately affect aliens applying for lawful permanent resident status, foreign students, and aliens affiliated with educational institutions linked to anti-Semitic activity. There is no room in the United States for the rest of the world's terrorist sympathizers, and we are under no obligation to admit them or let them stay here.
I didn't see a Supreme Court ruling.
Who thinks they can come to America and hide behind the First Amendment to advocate for anti-Semitic violence and terrorism, think again. You are not welcome here. So USCIS, I admit, they are not CBP, but I'm sure there's some equivalent for CBP. But at a bare minimum, USCIS has received marching orders. And I think you would agree, they're equating anti-Semitism to support of Palestine, and they're equating support of Palestine to support of Hamas, and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. DHS is already implementing these policies broadly, and so therefore, when I get indication from Hassan, who has the very same views that you would agree, right? Like if Hassan wasn't a U.S. citizen and he were asked his questions and denied entry,
I think if Hassan wasn't a U.S. citizen, he would have been thrown out or detained.
Denied entry. Yeah.
Most certainly.
Despite the fact that he's famous.
Correct. Yeah.
And
well, maybe his fame would save him. Maybe. But like, but that's it's also quite possible they could just make an example out of him.
Yeah, that to me, the fact that it would be so easy.
Okay. So if they're trying to make an example, what do you think the goal of that is? Why are they implementing these policies?
I almost called him Hamas Becker. If Hassan were not a citizen and denied entry or kicked out of the country, it wouldn't surprise you in the slightest. In fact, be like, yeah, it makes sense they would do that.
I would argue that I would expect that, not that it wouldn't surprise. I would genuinely believe that to be more likely.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the only thing stopping you from saying that the most likely situation in this case is a continuation of that kind of discriminatory framework as applied to non-citizens that you admit is already ongoing. The only thing that's preventing you from saying that in this context is because it's in the context of questioning as opposed to a denial of entry. Or it pertains to a U.S. citizen as opposed to an alien.
It's that it was the questioning, even as described by Hassan, didn't seem like egregiously pervasive. It doesn't seem like they were really holding him detaining him in a manner that I feel like could have been kind of fudged by the Trump administration or by CBP. It's just I'm not seeing. And also on top of that, it's having to trust his word when just materially, can we agree he has every single incentive to lie and play up how bad this was, right? He has every single incentive to lie and play it up, correct?
Yeah, I agree. Well, I agree. He has incentives to lie, I guess, and play things up.
Yeah, like he has a very big incentive to make himself the victim of this, like the biggest victim that he can reasonably in any way get away with. And so I see no reason, especially when we already have indications that he had not been truthful about what was it, like the duration, that I don't see a reason to believe everything that he's saying as he presents it.
Well, give me a quick second. I'm reading something real quick.
Sorry, what?
Just give me 1 second. I'm reading something real quick.
Yeah.
Wow.
Media presence and things like that. And listen, I think this bottoms out into our priors about what's most factually likely. I think what's most factually likely is that there is this policy to target individuals, both U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens, who express pro-Palestinian sentiment. I think you've granted that for non-citizens, you would think that would be most likely, but for citizens, you're not convinced by that. I guess I'll ask, if it is the case that there is a policy by CBP to target U.S. citizens who are pro-Palestinian, would you have a problem with that?
Who are pro-Palestinian?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. I would have a problem with targeting a pro-Palestinian for anything.
Or if there were a policy to target people who are pro-Hamas, would you have a problem with that? If there were a policy that said, we are going to subject people who state that they're pro-Hamas to more checks at the border.
Yeah, I think that you're going to need more than just the subway guy saying, go Hamas.
Okay, but you would be in favor of that?
Discord server. You're going to need more than that.
What there a policy that said, if you strenuously advocate in favor of Hamas, and we, we'll subject you to more checks. At that point, it becomes a little more unclear.
More questions at a thing. I think it's okay. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Do you have any more questions for me? I feel like it grounds out into
I feel like this is where we're at, and I felt like this is kind of where it was gonna be, right?
Yeah.
So it is what it is.
I think there is a policy, bro. I think there is a policy. I think they have figured out techniques and AI techniques to check individuals' social media accounts and for people who come into the border.
Is this getting towards the end now?
Random. I think they are checking these people's social media accounts.
Oh, no, I don't doubt that they're checking into people's social media accounts. I don't doubt that.
But specifically to check whether they have particular viewpoints. That is the viewpoint of being pro-Palestinian and not pro-Israel, right?
Yeah. No,
it just feels
so insane to argue it's out of a genuine concern for national security.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about probably. I could grant it. I genuinely. Probably, yeah. I don't know. I'd say it wouldn't surprise me.
It wouldn't surprise me at all. And I think it's the more likely outcome that Hassan Piker his encounter was related to a policy that I consider to be anti-pro-Palestinian speech. And so that I take to be.
I don't think it's unreasonable that's what happened. I don't think it's unreasonable that he was going through customs. Maybe he got flagged because of his name, because he's probably gonna get fucking flagged because of his name. They brought him off to the side, checked his social media, and was like, "Oh, I'm gonna ask this guy questions in regards to like terrorist sympathizer stuff." And they asked him some questions based on what they found through the social media stuff.
Yeah, but if that's true, right? If they're questioning pursuant to a policy, if his stop or his questioning is related to a policy, which I take to be viewpoint discrimination, regardless of in his specific factual pattern, Hassan has a greater amount of negligent or culpable conduct, I'm going to say it's unwarranted and wrong, even if those specific circumstances exist in Hassan's case, because it is tied, and I believe, to a policy that's ongoing to target individuals who are pro-Palestinian, even if in his case there may be some more egregious statements.
Okay. I think that the policy could be wrong, but still also flag people who could be on margin, who I think if they were asked like 1 or 2 more questions, I don't consider that really a problem in the context of somebody's limited knowledge of who this individual is.
Well, it's not the number of questions, right? The number of like if there were a policy that said, all right, black people, they do have higher propensity of crimes all else equal.
No, it's his connection to
but it's not the number of questions, right?
Well, the number of questions is the result or the outcome of his proximity to pro-terrorist sentiment. That's the consequence.
But whether if the deprivation is 1 or 2 more is 1 more question, right?
Or what is this not about how many questions are asked?
Dude, this is quite frustrating.
Well, it doesn't really matter the burden here. What matters is the connection between the legitimate purpose and what the burden is, not the how the magnitude of the burden, right? Because if it were 1 more question, but you only ask it to people who are because protected speech doesn't matter. What matters is that connection between legitimate.
Correct, and I believe the connection warrants 1 or 2 more questions,
but not 5 more questions or 10 more questions.
You know what I'm talking about? Like not like actually like holding this guy over for a long period of time.
Okay, hey man, good combo. I also want to clear like on the stuff about the school shooter example. I want to be clear about where I would categorize different things. Things related to schools and students' speech.
Okay, I feel like that's kind of the end of that.